Story 1. For the last year and a half, I'd been dating Jake, the man I loved more than anyone else in the world. He was incredibly loving, adventurous, compassionate, and generous. He gave more than he took, always prioritizing my needs and moods, but everything changed this year. Shortly after the new year, Jake gained temporary custody of his nephew, Oliver. The boy had been severely abused by his parents, and the scars he carried were heartbreaking. It crushed me to see Oliver flinch at the slightest gesture, whether someone handed him a toy or simply turned to speak to him. He was an incredibly timid boy with a heart of gold, and I found myself grieving for the horrors he had faced. To provide some context, Oliver was 11 years old and weighed barely 50 pounds when Jake took him in. He struggled with basic reading and math. He often cried over simple addition and subtraction. When he first arrived, he couldn't tie his shoes or pour himself a glass of water. His neglectful parents had let him go on like that, leaving him to sit in his own filth for days. On almost a nightly basis, Oliver suffered from night terrors that woke him with gasps, triggering my instinct to check on him. Jake comforted him, sitting by his side, rubbing his back until he settled down. He read to Oliver daily, but whenever he encouraged him to read aloud, the boy became overwhelmed and tears flowed. I'd never truly hated anyone, but if I could, it would be his mother and father. One night, I stayed over at Jake's place. I woke up and noticed he wasn't in bed, so I tiptoed down the hall. Peeking into the living room, I saw him in his recliner, holding Oliver as he sobbed quietly. My heart sank. Jake confessed he was determined to fight for Oliver, vowing to spend every penny he had to keep him away from his parents. He admitted he was terrified and needed my support. Stupidly, I promised to be there. But here's the issue. I didn't sign up for this. I loved Oliver and wanted to protect him from returning to his parents, but I had a life with Jake before this all happened, and it was wonderful. We would spontaneously go hiking, take weekend trips with no destination in mind, explore quirky restaurants, and volunteer at the food bank. Now, it felt like we had a toddler in our lives, and it was taking a toll on me. I just missed the freedom we had. I felt guilty for feeling this way, but I was struggling. I didn't sign up for bedtime stories, bath time, and constant nightmares. I knew Jake would choose Oliver over me, so I wouldn't ask him to make that choice. That would be cruel, but I couldn't help but feel cheated by this situation. When I thought of my struggles compared to what Oliver had endured, I felt selfish. Update 1. I was acutely aware of the negative thoughts swirling in my mind, but I couldn't ignore the immense pressure that loomed over me like a thick fog. Jake had become the father that Oliver desperately needed, and while that transformation was undeniably beautiful, it also made me feel like a bystander in my own life. I had a long talk with Grace, my best friend, who always supported me through thick and thin. Over coffee one afternoon, her concerned gaze pierced through my self-imposed barriers as I vented my frustrations. "You need to be honest with him," she said gently, her voice steady but laced with concern. "You can't keep bottling this up. It'll eat away at you." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I realized then that I needed a plan. If I wanted to maintain this relationship, I had to understand Oliver better, to grasp the full extent of what he was going through. I began researching ways to support children who had experienced trauma, diving into articles, books, and online forums. I even sought out support groups for families facing similar situations, desperate to find a community where I could voice my struggles and fears. Meanwhile, Jake continued to fight for Oliver, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. He was juggling his demanding job as a social worker while also trying to care for Oliver, and I felt like I was on the sidelines, watching him battle an uphill fight. I couldn't just remain a passive observer anymore. I decided I needed to get involved, not just for Oliver's sake, but for Jake's well-being as well. I wanted to support them both in this challenging journey. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I mustered the courage to voice my thoughts. "Maybe we can look into therapy for Oliver," I suggested, my heart racing as I spoke. My hands fidgeted nervously in my lap as I awaited Jake's response, fully aware that this wasn't just about Oliver. It was about our relationship, too. I watched Jake's face closely, searching for any sign of resistance. Instead, he nodded, a look of gratitude washing over his features. "That could help him process everything," he replied, relief evident in his voice. I felt a spark of hope igniting within me, a glimmer that perhaps we could navigate this together. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. I dove into helping Jake gather materials on child education and how to manage trauma. Together, we sought out professionals to ensure Oliver received the necessary support he needed. I began to feel a sense of purpose emerging from the chaos that had overtaken our lives. The more involved I became, the more I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my life. Yet, even in the midst of this positive momentum, there were moments that dragged me back to the harsh reality of our situation. One night while we were poring over articles about childhood trauma, Oliver peeked in, his small frame silhouetted against the dim light of the living room. "Can I help?" he asked shyly, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart melted at his eagerness, and I exchanged a look with Jake, who smiled softly, encouraging him. "Of course, buddy, we'd love your help," I said, my tone warm and inviting. Watching Oliver's face light up as he joined us was like a balm to my aching heart. As we sat together, I realized that I could help Oliver find joy in learning again. We crafted a routine that included study time and fun educational games, and I even encouraged Oliver to read with me. It was a struggle at first. He often became frustrated and overwhelmed, tears welling up in his eyes as he faced the challenges of basic phonics and math problems. But slowly, I began to see glimpses of the boy he could become. "Just take a deep breath, Oliver," I would say gently, reminding him that it was okay to make mistakes. "We're here to have fun, remember." His small nods and shy smiles began to fill the room with a sense of hope. Each time he persevered through a difficult task, I felt a surge of pride for him and a renewed sense of purpose for myself. I was becoming more than just Jake's girlfriend. I was becoming a part of Oliver's healing journey. However, the weight of my feelings still loomed over me like a dark cloud. As I helped Oliver, I often found myself longing for the carefree days before his arrival. I missed our spontaneous adventures, those carefree hikes into the mountains and lazy afternoons spent exploring the city. I missed the late-night talks with Jake, where we would dream about our future together, unencumbered by responsibilities and heartache. I missed the intimacy we shared before Oliver's arrival, nights spent whispering sweet nothings and cuddling without the worry of a child's nightmares interrupting our peace. Yet I knew that if I wanted to be part of Jake's life, I had to embrace this new reality. I had to find a way to balance my love for him with my commitment to Oliver. I started to realize that this was not just about survival, it was about thriving as a new kind of family. As the days turned into weeks, I felt a growing bond with Oliver, but I still battled with my emotions. I confided in Grace during our weekly coffee catch-up. "I'm trying, but it's hard. I feel like I'm losing Jake," I admitted, my voice cracking as I spoke. I could see the concern on her face, and it only deepened my sense of vulnerability. "You won't lose him," she reassured me firmly. "Just be honest with him. You have to find a balance, and he needs to know how you feel. You both love Oliver, and that will bring you together, not apart." Her words lingered in my mind as I prepared for the next steps in our journey. I knew I had to talk to Jake soon, but I also needed to ensure that Oliver was safe and supported. It was a delicate balance, but I was determined to be there for both of them, even if it meant navigating my own conflicting emotions. But even as I tried to believe that, the pressure kept building. One night after another exhausting day helping Oliver with his reading and listening to Jake vent about his job, I snapped. "I just miss who we were, Jake," I said sharply. "Before this, before everything changed, I didn't sign up to be a full-time parent." Jake froze. His jaw tightened, and for a long moment he didn't say a word. Then quietly but firmly he said, "If that's how you really feel, maybe you should walk away." The words hit me like a slap. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was hurt. And suddenly I wasn't sure if he was talking about me giving up on him or on Oliver, or maybe both. I wanted to say something, anything, but the lump in my throat stopped me. I left the room in silence, my mind spiraling with guilt, grief, and confusion. As I lay in bed that night, I felt the weight of my heartache, but I also felt a flicker of determination. I was ready to confront my fears and find a way to be the partner Jake needed while also being the support Oliver deserved. I wouldn't let my doubts define me. This was my chance to grow, to adapt, and to create a family worth fighting for. The journey ahead was daunting, but I was willing to face it head-on, one step at a time. Update 2. As the battle for Oliver's custody continued, tensions escalated more than I could have imagined. Jake and I received word that Oliver's parents were determined to fight for custody, and I felt an anxious knot form in my stomach. The thought of them clawing their way back into his life made my skin crawl. They had caused Oliver too much pain, and I couldn't bear to think of him returning to them. The very idea of their toxic influence re-entering his world was unbearable, and I knew we had to prepare for every possible scenario. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, I found Jake staring blankly at the wall, exhaustion etched on his features. I could see the shadows of worry hanging around him, and it broke my heart. "What if they win?" he whispered, his voice shaky and filled with dread. The vulnerability in his tone shattered my heart. I had never seen him so defeated, and it terrified me to think of what would happen to Oliver if we lost this fight. "Jake, we're doing everything we can," I reassured him, reaching for his hand, trying to convey my strength through the warmth of my grip. "We have to believe that the court will see how much Oliver needs us." He nodded, but I could see the worry lingering in his eyes, the fear of helplessness creeping in. I knew we needed to take action, to fortify our defenses against the onslaught that was likely coming. I decided to plan a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in custody cases. I believed that having a strong advocate would help us immensely, and I was determined not to let this opportunity pass by. When we met with the attorney, I felt a glimmer of hope as I listened to his advice. He helped us understand our rights and the best ways to protect Oliver. "We need to gather evidence of the trauma Oliver has endured," the lawyer said, his tone serious. "That will be crucial in demonstrating why he should remain in your custody." As we left the meeting, I glanced at Jake, who looked slightly more hopeful. "This might actually work," he said, a hint of determination returning to his voice. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We were no longer just reacting to the situation, we were actively fighting for Oliver's future. It was empowering, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control amid the chaos. Over the next few weeks, we delved into building a detailed plan for the upcoming court hearing. We gathered documentation from Oliver's teachers, evidence of his struggles, and notes from the therapist we had found. Each piece of paperwork felt like a small victory, a step toward ensuring Oliver's safety. I even suggested bringing in a therapist as a witness to help demonstrate the trauma Oliver had endured. Having a professional vouch for his needs could make all the difference, I explained to Jake, who seemed to appreciate the proactive approach. "We need to show that we're not just fighting for him, we're fighting for what's best for him." As the days passed, the tension in our home began to shift slightly. Even though we were still navigating the uncertainty of our situation, the act of preparing together felt like a bonding experience. We would sit late into the night, poring over documents and discussing strategies. I could see Jake's resolve hardening with every passing day, and it inspired me. We were a team, and our shared purpose drew us closer together. "I've been thinking," Jake said one night, his brow furrowed as he focused on a stack of papers. "What if we create a video, something that shows how far Oliver has come since he's been with us?" "That's a great idea," I exclaimed, my heart racing at the thought. "We could include clips of him reading, playing, and interacting with us. It would help illustrate the love and support he has here." Jake smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Exactly. It would be a way to show the court his progress and how much he's thriving." Even though I felt stronger participating in this process, there were still moments of tension that crept in like shadows. I confided in Grace that I was afraid I would lose Jake if we didn't succeed. "What if he feels like he has to choose between me and Oliver?" I said, my voice trembling. "What if I'm not enough?" Grace looked at me with compassion, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're not a replacement for Oliver's parents, but you're a vital part of his support system. Jake loves you, and he sees you as someone who can help Oliver heal. You're not a threat, you're a blessing." I nodded, but something inside me still felt broken. That night, while talking to Grace on the phone from our kitchen, I let myself unravel. "I just want my life back," I said quietly, unaware that my voice carried through the hallway. "Sometimes I wish things could go back to the way they were before Oliver." I didn't notice the small shadow in the doorway until I heard the creak of the wooden floor. I turned, and there he was, Oliver, his eyes wide, his lips trembling. "Oliver, I didn't mean," I began, but he was already backing away. The next morning, he barely looked at me. He refused to read with me, wouldn't sit near me at breakfast, and kept his distance all day. That evening, I found him trying to pack his little backpack. "Where are you going, sweetie?" I asked, kneeling gently beside him. He didn't look up. "Back to my mom and dad," he whispered. "You don't want me here." My heart shattered. I wrapped my arms around him and held him tight. "No, Oliver, no." I was upset and tired, and I said something I didn't mean. "You are not a problem. You're not a mistake. You're part of this family now." He didn't answer at first, but he didn't pull away either. Eventually, he whispered, "You promise." "I promise," I said, my voice trembling. "And I'm so sorry." That night, after tucking him in, I broke down in Jake's arms and confessed everything. I'd hurt Oliver and I couldn't take it back, but I could spend every day trying to show him he mattered. Her words brought me some comfort, but uncertainty still clung to me. I had never felt so much pressure in my life, and I was terrified of the implications of failing. I was determined to push through, to show Jake and Oliver that I was all in, but the weight of my fears threatened to overwhelm me. As the court date approached, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing and thoughts spiraling. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that was at stake. I imagined Oliver's fragile little face, his hopeful eyes, and the way he had started to trust me. I couldn't let that slip away. "Hey, are you okay?" Jake asked one night as I sat up in bed, lost in thought. He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "You seem distant." "I'm just thinking about everything," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if we don't win? What if he ends up back with them?" Jake sighed, pulling me closer. "We're doing everything we can. We have to believe that the court will see how much he needs us." His words, though reassuring, did little to quell the storm inside me. In an attempt to channel my fears into something productive, I started writing down my feelings, how scared I was, how much I cared for Oliver, and how much I loved Jake. It became a sort of journal, a place where I could express my fears without judgment. Writing it all down sometimes felt like a release, a way to clarify my thoughts and emotions. The day before the hearing, we sat down with Oliver to talk about what to expect. I wanted him to feel prepared and safe. "You'll be with us, buddy, and we're going to tell the judge how much you've grown and how much we love you," I said, my heart swelling with pride as I spoke. Oliver looked up at us, his eyes wide with uncertainty. "What if they take me away?" he asked, his voice trembling. The vulnerability in his question broke my heart into a million pieces. "They won't," Jake assured him, kneeling down to Oliver's level, his voice firm yet soothing. "You're safe with us and we're going to fight for you. You're not going anywhere." I watched as Oliver slowly nodded, but I could see the fear still flickering in his eyes. "Just remember, you're not alone," I added, squeezing his hand. "We're all in this together." As I looked at Jake and Oliver, I felt a newfound determination. I couldn't let my fears dictate our future. We were a family fighting for each other, and together we would face whatever challenges lay ahead. I wasn't just stepping into a courtroom as a girlfriend. I was stepping in as a protector, a supporter, and an advocate for Oliver's future. Whatever happened next, we would face it together, and I was ready to stand by their side, unwavering in my commitment to our new family. Update 3. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived, and I could hardly contain the whirlwind of emotions churning inside me. I felt nervous and anxious, but also determined. The stakes had never felt higher. Before we entered the courtroom, I held Jake's hand tightly, our fingers interlaced as if to draw strength from one another. We swore to do everything we could to protect Oliver. As we walked into the courtroom, I felt all eyes on us, and I tried to stay calm, focusing on the moment ahead. The courtroom itself was stark and intimidating, filled with the echoes of past decisions that had changed lives. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I took a deep breath, reminding myself of why we were there. Oliver stood beside us, his small form dwarfed by the larger-than-life furniture and the imposing presence of the judge. He glanced up at us, searching for reassurance, and I smiled down at him, hoping to convey all the love and support I felt in my heart. The hearing was tense from the start. We listened to the arguments from Oliver's parents, and I could hardly believe what they were saying. They attempted to justify their actions, painting a picture of rehabilitation and change, but the evidence we had gathered spoke volumes. I could see Jake's jaw clench as he listened to their fabrications, and a protective instinct surged within me. I wanted to scream, to tell them how much damage they had done to this innocent child. Our attorney presented a strong case about Oliver's condition and the trauma he had suffered. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and authoritative, "the evidence clearly shows that returning Oliver to his parents would be detrimental to his mental and emotional well-being." I felt a wave of hope wash over me as his words sank in, but I could also sense the tension in the room, thick enough to cut with a knife. When it was our turn to speak, I felt my heart race. I had rehearsed my words countless times, but standing there in front of the judge was a different story. "Your Honor," I started, my voice trembling slightly, "I stand here today not just as Jake's partner, but as someone who cares deeply for Oliver. He has flourished in our care, and we want nothing more than to provide him with a safe and loving home." I could feel Jake's supportive gaze on me, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this. I continued, "Oliver deserves the chance to heal and grow, free from the pain and neglect he has already faced. We are committed to helping him, and we believe that keeping him with us is what's best for him." As I spoke, I glanced at Oliver, who was watching me with wide eyes. I could see the flicker of hope in his expression, and it fueled my determination. "We've created a nurturing environment for him. We've worked hard to ensure he has access to therapy, education, and the love he needs to thrive." The words felt powerful, and I knew I was fighting not just for myself or Jake, but for Oliver's future. I wanted him to know that he wasn't just a pawn in a court battle. He was a child worthy of love and stability. The judge listened intently, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. After what felt like an eternity, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I appreciate your commitment to Oliver's well-being," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "However, I must consider the implications of this decision beyond the courtroom." The tension in the room was palpable as we waited for her to continue. I felt my heart racing. Every second felt like an hour. Would she see the truth? Would she understand how much Oliver needed us? After what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again. "Based on the evidence presented, and considering the best interests of the child, I am granting temporary custody to Jake. Oliver will remain in your care while further assessments are conducted regarding his parents' fitness." A wave of relief washed over me, and I could hardly believe what I had just heard. I glanced at Jake, who looked equally stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. Oliver's face lit up with joy, and I knelt down to envelop him in a tight hug. "You're safe, Oliver. You're not going anywhere," I exclaimed, my voice breaking with emotion. Jake joined us, wrapping his arms around both of us, and for a moment we stood there, a small island of warmth and love amid the sterile courtroom environment. I could feel the weight of the world lifting from our shoulders, and I knew in that moment that we had fought for something worth fighting for. This was our family. As we left the courtroom, I felt a sense of accomplishment and hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. The battle was far from over, but today was a victory. We decided to host a small celebration that evening, inviting a few close friends and family members to share in our joy. As we gathered around the table, laughter filled the air, and for the first time in months I felt like we were starting to reclaim our lives. Jake raised a glass, his smile radiant. "Thank you all for your support. This isn't just a win for us, it's a win for Oliver. We're so grateful to have you all in our lives." I watched as Oliver's face lit up at the mention of his name, and it filled my heart with warmth. It was a moment I would cherish forever. After everyone left, Jake turned to me, his expression softening with a mix of relief and gratitude. "Thank you for being there for both of us. I couldn't have done this without you." I smiled, feeling the bond between us grow stronger. "We're in this together, Jake. I love you both, and I'm here for the long haul." From that moment on, we began a new chapter in our lives, one filled with challenges and joys. I found a way to balance my love for Jake with my commitment to Oliver. Together, we built a nurturing home where Oliver felt safe and loved, and where he had the opportunity to heal and thrive. As days turned into weeks, I watched Oliver flourish in our care. He began to smile more, his laughter echoing through our home, and it felt like a melody I had longed to hear. We established routines that included reading time, art projects, and even cooking together. I found joy in teaching him, and he seemed eager to learn, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. We celebrated small victories. The first time Oliver tied his shoes without help, the first time he read aloud to us without hesitation, and the way he began to express his feelings in words rather than tears. Each milestone felt monumental, a testament to the love and support we were providing. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would still be challenges, and the threat of Oliver's parents loomed over us. But I knew we had each other, and that made all the difference. As I tucked Oliver into bed that night, I whispered, "You're home now, and we're going to take care of you. You're part of our family." He smiled sleepily, and for the first time I could see a flicker of peace in his eyes. We were a family, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. With love, determination, and a commitment to each other, we would face the future together, ready to overcome any obstacle that lay ahead. Story 2, I haven't gotten anything from you. My son whispered while my family sat in silence, knowing they'd stolen $9,600 I'd been sending home during deployment. I walked out that night and never looked back. The meatloaf was overcooked. It always was when Mom made it. Gray, dense, and somehow both dry and soggy at the same time. I didn't say anything, just cut through the brick with my knife and tried to remember why I'd looked forward to this dinner for 8 months. 8 months of desert heat, midnight shifts, and counting down days until I could sit at this table with my family. My reward was burnt meat, instant mashed potatoes from a box, and the same uncomfortable silence I'd grown up with, dressed up as Sunday tradition. My son Jake sat across from me, picking at his food with the enthusiasm of someone eating cardboard. 20 years old, second-year mechanical engineering at State University. Same exhausted look I used to see in my own mirror during my college days, but he looked good overall. Tired in that way that means you're building something worthwhile, not just surviving. His voice had gotten deeper. Shoulders had filled out some since I'd been gone. Still my kid, but becoming his own man. He'd always been smart. Even as a little kid, Jake could take apart anything and put it back together better than it was before. When he told me he wanted to study engineering, I'd said yes before he finished the sentence. The problem was paying for it. State school tuition had tripled since I was his age. Books cost more than my first car. And that was before you factored in rent, food, lab fees, and all the other ways colleges found to drain your bank account. My job with the contractor paid well, but not well enough to cover everything Jake needed while keeping up with my own bills. So when the overseas deployment came up, better pay, housing allowance, hardship bonus, I jumped at it. 8 months away from home, so my son could focus on school instead of working himself to death. Somewhere between the rubbery green beans and my father's third beer of the evening, I asked the question that had been on my mind since I landed at O'Hare this morning. Jake, was the $1,200 I've been sending enough? I know engineering textbooks are expensive as hell. Jake stopped chewing, looked up at me with genuine confusion. What $1,200, Dad? The words hit me like a cold slap across the face. The money, I said carefully, every month while I've been deployed, for your expenses. He set down his fork with the deliberate care of someone trying to process information that doesn't make sense. What money? I haven't gotten anything from you. I felt something shift in my chest. A cold, familiar feeling I hadn't felt since my last tour in Afghanistan when our local contact turned out to be feeding information to the Taliban. The feeling that everything you thought you knew was a lie. Jake, I've sent you $1,200 every month for 8 months, through Grandpa's international account. I thought. Jake's voice got quiet. Grandpa said you were stretched thin financially. Across the table, my mother suddenly became very interested in her napkin. My father shifted in his chair and took a long, slow pull of his beer. My brother Derek practically lunged for the TV remote. Is that the Cowboys game starting? Derek said, way too loud and way too cheerful. Thought we were gonna catch the second half. Been looking forward to this all week. I didn't look away from Jake. Didn't let Derek's distraction work. What exactly did Grandpa tell you? Jake glanced around the table, reading the tension in the room. Just that the deployment was tough financially, that you were doing your best but couldn't help with college expenses right now, that I shouldn't bring it up because it would. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Stress you out. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic, just heavy. Dad finally looked up from his beer, but not at Jake, not at me, just sort of vaguely toward the wall behind my head. Well, this is getting uncomfortable. Maybe we should change the subject. How about them cowboys? Jake turned to his grandfather slowly. You let me believe my dad didn't care enough to help me, he said, not yelling, not accusing, just stating a fact that was settling into his brain like concrete. He's being dramatic, Derek muttered without looking at him. Kid's always been too emotional about everything. I'm 20, Jake said quietly, and I've been working 2 jobs because I thought my dad abandoned me. Nobody had anything to say to that. Jake sat back in his chair and I watched something die in his eyes. That trust. That basic assumption that the people who raised you have your back. Dad cleared his throat like he was about to give a speech. Maybe we should all just take a step back here. Everyone's getting worked up over nothing. Nothing. I stood up slow and deliberate. I sent $9,600 to help my son get through school over the past 8 months, and he never saw a dime of it. You call that nothing? You sent it here, Derek said with a shrug, finally looking up. We used it where it was needed most. The room went dead silent. Even Derek seemed to realize he'd just stepped on a landmine. Where it was needed most, I repeated slowly. My son working 2 jobs while taking 18 credit hours wasn't neat enough for you. He survived, didn't he? Mom said defensively. Stop acting like it's the end of the world. Young people are supposed to work hard. I looked at my son, my kid who'd been grinding himself into the ground for 8 months, thinking his father didn't give a damn about his future. Then I looked at the people who'd stolen that from both of us. Jake, I said, get your coat. He didn't argue, just stood up, grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair, and headed for the door. I followed, leaving my family sitting there with their burnt meatloaf and their guilty consciences. We didn't talk in the truck for the first 10 minutes. Jake stared out the passenger window, jaw tight, hands clenched into fists. I recognized the look. It's what men do when they're trying not to fall apart in front of other people. I drove aimlessly for a while, just trying to put distance between us and that house. Finally, I pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot and killed the engine. The kind of place where you could sit for hours and nobody would bother you. How much did you say again? Jake asked quietly. $1,200 a month for 8 months, plus I've been sending them $500 monthly for house expenses for the last 3 years. I could see Jake doing the math in his head, and I watched his face get paler as the numbers added up. Jesus, Dad, that's, he trailed off, shaking his head. $15,400 they've taken from both of us. He nodded once, stared straight ahead at the diner's neon sign. I wanted you focused on school, not worried about rent and groceries and whether you could afford to eat, I said. I ate ramen noodles for 2 months straight, Jake said. His voice was steady, controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. Couldn't afford anything else after tuition and books. Lost 15 pounds because I was skipping meals. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. They stole from both of us. They made you feel like asking for help was a burden, Jake nodded. Every time I thought about calling you, I'd hear Grandpa's voice saying you were already stretched thin, that I needed to be a man and handle it myself. That hit me in the gut, because that's exactly what my father would say. That's exactly the kind of old school, pull yourself up by your bootstraps garbage I'd grown up hearing. You know what the worst part is? Jake asked. What? I started to believe maybe you were relieved, that maybe with me in college and you deployed, you could finally focus on yourself, that maybe I'd been holding you back. I turned to look at him then, really look at him, my son. My kid who'd been carrying around the weight of thinking his father didn't love him enough to help him succeed. Jake, I said, you are the best thing I've ever done with my life. There is nothing I wouldn't do for you, nothing I wouldn't sacrifice to make sure you have every opportunity to succeed. He nodded, but I could see tears in his eyes. I know that now. That night after I got Jake settled in a decent hotel room, I opened my laptop in my own room across the hall. First thing I did was log into the bank and cancel that monthly $500 transfer to my parents. Gone. Done. Then I sat there thinking about what else they might have taken, what other lies they'd told while I was overseas working my ass off to support my family. The house. My house that Derek had been watching. When I'd gotten the deployment assignment, he'd moved in to keep it from sitting empty. That was our deal. I keep paying the mortgage, he keeps the place from falling apart. I'd been planning to sell it when I got back, maybe use the equity for Jake's last 2 years of school and graduate school if he wanted to go that route. but Derek had begged me to let him stay. Said renting was too expensive, that he'd take good care of the place, that it would be a win-win situation. Family helping family, right? Now I was wondering what that arrangement had actually cost me. I pulled up the property tax website and entered my address. The page loaded and my blood ran cold. 3 months behind on property taxes. Late fees stacking up like building blocks. Penalty interest compounding monthly. If I'd stayed deployed another month, they could have started foreclosure proceedings. I clicked over to the utility company websites. Electric, gas, water, trash, all of them showing past due balances. Not just 1 or 2 months, some of them going back to when Derek had first moved in. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just neglect. This was systematic. He'd been living in my house, using my utilities, and letting everything go to hell while I sent money every month for house expenses. I called my buddy Marcus. We'd served together in Afghanistan, and I'd trust him with my life. He had gotten out of the army 2 years ago and started doing private security consulting. "You realize this is probably criminal," Marcus said, after I walked him through everything over a secure video call. "Not just civil court stuff. This could be wire fraud, identity theft, financial abuse if they've been forging your signatures on anything." "Will I win if I take them to court?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could see him thinking through the legal angles. "Brother, you're not just gonna win. You're gonna bury them so deep they'll need a backhoe to find daylight." "What do you mean?" "I mean you've got documentation of everything. Bank transfers with specific purposes, text messages showing they knew the money was for Jake, property records showing they haven't maintained your house. This is slam-dunk territory." I felt something settle in my chest, a kind of cold determination I hadn't felt since my military days, when you knew you had a mission to complete and you were going to complete it no matter what. "What's the first step?" "First, we go look at your house. Document the condition, take pictures of everything. Then we start building a case that's going to make them wish they'd never heard your name." 2 days later, Marcus and I drove to my house in his pickup truck. He'd brought a professional camera, a legal pad, and an attitude that suggested he was looking forward to this. I hadn't seen the place in 8 months. The house I'd bought when Jake was in high school, the first place that had ever really felt like home. What I saw when we pulled into the driveway made my stomach turn. The grass was dead, not just brown from winter, dead. Patches of mud where the sprinkler system had clearly been broken for months. The flower beds were full of weeds taller than the fence. Paint was peeling from the front porch. One of the gutters was hanging loose, clearly damaged by a storm that nobody had bothered to fix. This wasn't normal wear and tear. This was neglect. Systematic, deliberate neglect. Marcus started taking pictures before we even got out of the truck. Derek answered the door in a bathrobe at 2 p.m., looking like he'd just rolled out of bed, hair going in 6 directions, stubble smelling like beer and cigarettes. "Well, well. Look who's back," he said, grinning like this was some kind of joke. "Thought you weren't due home for another month." "Change of plans," I said. "We need to talk." He stepped aside, gesturing grandly like he was welcoming me into a palace. The living room looked like a frat house after a 3-day party. Empty beer bottles lined up on every surface. Pizza boxes stacked in the corner. Cigarette burns in my hardwood floors. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Stale beer, old food, cigarettes, and something else I didn't want to identify. Marcus pulled out his camera and started documenting everything. Derek noticed and his casual attitude started to slip. "Hey, what's with the photography session?" "Evidence," Marcus said without looking up from his camera. "Evidence of what?" I looked around at what used to be my living room. At the house I'd worked overtime to afford, that I'd trusted my brother to maintain, that I'd been sending money to support. "Derek," I said calmly, "where's the money I've been sending for house expenses?" He laughed, but it sounded forced now. "What money?" Marcus stepped forward, all business. "Mr. Thompson, we have bank records showing your brother has been sending $500 monthly for house maintenance and upkeep." Derek's attitude shifted fast. The casual, joking demeanor disappeared, replaced by something uglier. "Who the hell are you?" "Legal counsel," Marcus said, which wasn't technically a lie since he'd passed the bar before deciding he preferred the private sector. "We also have documentation showing property taxes are 3 months delinquent." "Look," Derek said, suddenly less cocky. "Money's been tight, okay? I meant to catch up on the taxes." Things just got away from me. And the utilities, I asked. They're all past due, some of them for months. Derek shrugged. Utilities are expensive, man. Gas bill alone is like $300 in the winter. That's what the $500 a month was supposed to cover. Yeah, well, there were other expenses. Food, gas for my truck, general living expenses. It all adds up. And the $1,200 I've been sending every month for Jake's expenses. Where did that go? I asked. Derek's face went blank. I don't know anything about that. That's between you and the old man. I looked around at my trashed house, at my brother who'd been treating my deployment like an all-expenses-paid vacation, and made a decision. You're out, I said. 30 days. Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it now. You can't just kick me out, I live here. Marcus handed him an envelope. Formal eviction notice, legal and binding. Derek opened it, read it, and his face went white. You can't be serious. Dead serious, I said. You've got 30 days to find somewhere else to live. This is bullshit, Derek exploded. I've been taking care of this place. I gestured around the wreckage of my living room. This is your idea of taking care of it. Where am I supposed to go? Not my problem anymore. Derek's eyes got ugly then. The mask slipped completely and I saw what he really thought of me. You know what your problem is? You think you're better than us. Mr. Big Shot military man, but you're just a glorified janitor with a uniform. I taught to drive, laid out of trouble more times than I can count, who's been stealing from my son while destroying my house. Maybe, I said. But this glorified janitor owns the house you're living in, and your 30 days starts now. Then I turned around, cutting off whatever he was about to say, and walked back to the truck with Marcus. That night I called a locksmith, a cleaning service, and a contractor to assess the damage to the house. 3 weeks later, Derek was gone. It wasn't pleasant. He fought the eviction, claiming squatters' rights, adverse possession, and half a dozen other legal theories that Marcus demolished in about 10 minutes. When the sheriff showed up to physically remove him, Derek had one last tantrum. Screamed about family loyalty, about how I was abandoning him, about how he'd never forgive me. I watched from across the street as they loaded his stuff into a U-Haul truck. Didn't feel good about it. Didn't feel bad about it either, just felt necessary. Mom and Dad stopped speaking to me after that, which was fine by me. They'd chosen their side when they decided my son wasn't worth protecting. I got a job with a defense contractor, better pay than the military, regular hours, and I was home every night. Jake quit both his part-time jobs and focused on his studies. The change was immediate and dramatic. His grades went from B's and C's to straight A's almost immediately. Turns out it's a lot easier to focus on thermodynamics when you're not exhausted from working 40 hours a week. We found him a decent apartment near campus. Nothing fancy, but clean, safe, with reliable heat and internet that actually worked. I paid the security deposit and first month's rent, and we went furniture shopping like he was starting fresh. This feels weird, Jake said as we loaded a new mattress into the truck. What feels weird? Having money for things, not having to choose between textbooks and groceries. Get used to it. This is how it's supposed to be. The house took 4 months to repair. New floors, fresh paint, professional cleaning, landscaping to bring the yard back from the dead. Cost me about $8,000, but it was worth it to erase every trace of what Derek had done to the place. I put it on the rental market and had 3 applications within a week. Good tenants, solid references, security deposit in hand. Suddenly, I had a second income stream that more than covered Jake's living expenses. As for my parents and Derek, the real consequences started hitting them about 3 months after I cut off the money. Derek called first, not to apologize, to demand. You need to start sending money again, he said without preamble. Mom and Dad are struggling. Mom's talking about selling the house. They can't make the mortgage without your help. Not my problem. It's the house you grew up in. It's the house where they taught me that family loyalty only goes one direction. Maybe it's time for them to learn what that really costs. Derek hung up on me. 2 weeks later, Mom called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the week, the messages were getting more desperate. I deleted it all without hearing. The house sold at auction 10 months after I cut them off. They got about 60% of what it was worth, enough to pay off the mortgage but not much else. Derek had been bouncing between shelters and friends' couches. Mom and Dad were living in a tiny apartment, struggling to afford basics. The final attempt came 18 months after I'd cut them off. Mom got diagnosed with diabetes, nothing life-threatening, but it required medication and dietary changes. She called me from the pharmacy. "I can't afford my insulin," she said. "It's $300 a month. Have you applied for assistance programs? The waiting list is 6 months long." "Then you'll wait 6 months. I could die." "No, you won't. You'll figure it out just like Jake figured out how to eat when you were stealing his food money." "Please," she whispered. "I'm begging you. What kind of man lets his mother suffer?" "The kind who learned from his mother that family only helps when it's convenient." That was the last time any of them called me. 3 years later, I ran into a family friend at the grocery store. She filled me in on what had happened to them. Dad was working part-time at a hardware store at 74 years old. Mom was cleaning offices at night. Derek was living in a studio apartment, working construction when he could find it. They'd made their choices. They'd chosen to steal from a college kid to subsidize a grown man's lifestyle. They'd chosen to let my son believe I'd abandoned him rather than admit what they'd done. Now they were living with those choices, working in their 70s because they'd spent their safety net on lies, struggling to afford basic needs because they'd prioritized the wrong things. Some people would call that cold. I call it consequences. Jake graduated summa cum laude 2 years later, got a job with Boeing starting at more money than I'd ever made in the military. Kid bought himself a new truck, cash down, and took me out for the most expensive dinner of my life. We have dinner every week. Sometimes his girlfriend Sarah joins us. Smart girl, driven, reminds me a lot of Jake in her determination to succeed. They're talking about getting married after she graduates. She asked me once if I missed my parents, my brother. I told her the truth. I miss the people I thought they were. I don't miss the people they actually turned out to be. "That's sad," she said. "What's sad," I told her, "is watching your kid work himself half to death because his family let him think his father didn't care about his future. Everything else is just cleanup." Jake reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thanks, Dad." "For what?" "For choosing me. When it mattered, you chose me." That's what it comes down to, isn't it? When push comes to shove, when you have to pick a side, when being the good guy means letting your kid get hurt. What do you choose? I chose my son. Every time. No regrets. The money I used to send my parents, now it goes into Jake's investment account. The emotional energy I used to waste managing their guilt trips and manipulation, now I spend it planning weekend fishing trips with my son. Better investment all around. Some people say I went too far. That family is family, and you forgive and move on. Those people have never watched their kid grind themselves into the ground while relatives stole their future and called it helping. I'd rather have my son know his worth than keep peace with people who proved they don't value him. Real fathers protect their children. Everything else is just noise. Story 3: Dad moves in soon to be bride, and she gets pregnant and demands I leave the house because she needs my room. I tell her, "Lady, I own the house." Sup, Reddit. My dad's gold-digging fiancée moved in with her 2 devil spawn. After she announced her pregnancy, she tried to kick me out of my own house. Her smirk disappeared when I told her I owned the place. What followed was an absolute shit show. Here's what went down. So this whole saga started about 9 years ago when my mom died from cancer. I 21 male was 12. Dad was a wreck, and nobody knew what the hell to do with me. Luckily for everyone involved, my grandparents lived just outside the city on this decent chunk of land, with a house that had seen better days, but still had good bones. After Mom passed, it just made sense for me to stay put with the grandparents. Dad would come home on weekends, holidays, whatever. The house itself is solid. 4 bedrooms, a couple of bathrooms, a big kitchen, sitting on about 3 acres of land that backs up to some woods. But here's where Dad started showing his true colors. Even as a kid, I noticed he had this thing about control. Everything had to be done his way, on his timeline, with his approval. He'd show up on weekends and immediately start rearranging things, telling Grandpa how to maintain the property properly, and making decisions about my life without asking anyone. My best friend, Ian, lived about 10 minutes down the road, so I wasn't completely isolated. Kid's been my ride or die since we were building forts in those backwoods. Here's where it gets interesting, though. My mom was an only child. I'm an only child. When Grandma and Grandpa started declining a few years back, guess who's the only name on the will? That's right. Yours truly inherited the whole damn operation when Grandpa died. House. Land. Grandpa's beat-to-hell pickup truck that somehow still runs, and a decent chunk of change they'd been sitting on. Dad used Mom's life insurance to renovate parts of the house over the years. But here's the thing. He acted like he was doing me some huge favor, like I should be grateful he was investing in the place. I found out about the inheritance when the lawyer called me after Grandpa's funeral. Dad was standing right there when I took that call. The look on his face when he realized I owned the house we were all living in, not embarrassment or guilt, more like irritation. Like I just complicated his life by existing. Ian was there that day helping me sort through Grandpa's tools. When Dad walked away after that phone call, Ian just looked at me and said, "So you own the house now? Damn, Thanksgiving is going to be awkward." But we never discussed it. Dad just pretended it never happened and kept acting like he was the man of the house, making all the decisions, controlling everything from what we watched on TV to when I was allowed to have friends over. About 2 years after Mom died, Dad started dating again. Nothing serious at first, just random coffee dates and dinner meetups. Fast forward to about 6 months ago, and he drops this bomb. He's got a serious girlfriend, a 30-year-old preschool teacher named Jennifer, who comes with 2 kids under 10 and enough emotional baggage to stock a therapy practice. Jennifer's got this whole young professional mom aesthetic going on, drives a white SUV that's always spotless, wears those athleisure outfits, and has opinions about organic food that she'll share whether you ask or not. Her kids, Hunter and Paisley, because, of course, their names sound like a country club membership roster, are these perfectly groomed little sociopaths. The first time Dad brought her to the house, she did this thing where she walked around, taking mental notes like, "This needs work and that needs replacing notes." I caught her opening cabinets and checking expiration dates on stuff in the pantry. "Your grandmother had such interesting taste," she said, running her finger along the vintage wallpaper. "It's so authentic, very lived in." The way she said lived in made it sound like a polite way of saying trashy, but Dad just ate it up. "Jennifer has such great design sense," he said, like she just complimented the Sistine Chapel. "She's got so many ideas for improvements." Her kids were even worse than she was. Hunter, who's maybe 8, spent the entire visit touching everything he wasn't supposed to touch while maintaining perfect eye contact. Paisley, the 6-year-old, accidentally knocked over Grandma's favorite plant and then looked at me like it was my fault for putting it where she could reach it. When I mentioned the plant, Jennifer just laughed. "Oh, kids will be kids. They're just excited to be in such a big house. They're not used to having so much space to explore." Ian came by that evening and caught the tail end of their visit. After they left, he looked around the living room where Jennifer had repositioned some of Grandma's throw pillows. "Well, she seems fun," he said. "Nothing says, I'm definitely not planning to redecorate your entire life like rearranging furniture on the first visit." But Dad was smitten, started spending more money on dates, bought new clothes, got his teeth whitened, classic midlife crisis stuff, except instead of buying a motorcycle, he'd found himself a ready-made family that came with built-in validation. Jennifer played it perfectly, asking his opinion on everything, deferring to his wisdom, letting him feel like the big, strong provider. 3 months in, she's practically moved in. Her stuff starts showing up in Dad's bathroom. Her car is in the driveway, more than it's at her apartment. Hunter and Paisley have claimed the guest room like they're planning to stay forever. And the kids, Jesus Christ, the kids. They went from perfectly behaved little angels to absolute demons the second they got comfortable. Hunter would accidentally break my stuff and then act confused when I got mad. Paisley would go through my room when I wasn't home and mess with my things, then deny everything when confronted. Whenever I complained, Jennifer would give me this wounded look and suggest that maybe I wasn't used to having kids around. Dad naturally took her side every time, telling me they're just kids and to cut them some slack. By month 4, she wasn't even pretending anymore. She'd gone from grateful guest to woman of the house faster than you could say gold digger. It started small, rearranging the living room furniture while Dad was at work, then acting like it had always been that way, replacing Grandma's dish towels with her own organic cotton ones, throwing away food she didn't approve of, and replacing it with expensive organic alternatives. But the real power move was how she started treating me like I was some deadbeat nephew who'd overstayed his welcome. She started making comments about my music being too loud after 9 p.m. because the children needed their sleep, and some of us had real jobs in the morning. "Sweetie, could you try to keep your music down after 9 p.m.?" she asked one Tuesday night while I was studying. The children need their sleep, and some of us have real jobs in the morning. Like being a college student in my own house was somehow less legitimate than teaching finger painting to toddlers. Dad just nodded along like this was perfectly reasonable. "She's right, son. We need to be considerate of everyone living here." Her kids got worse, too. Hunter figured out which buttons to push and started doing it. He'd wait until I was on the phone or in the middle of something important, then start making noise or asking me stupid questions. One day, he asked why I didn't have a girlfriend. When I told him to mind his own business, he informed me that his mom said it was because I lived with my dad like a loser. "Your mom says a lot of things," I told him. "Most of them are bullshit." "I'm telling," he yelled and ran off to find Jennifer. 5 minutes later, Dad's in my room, giving me the lecture about being a good role model and watching my language around the children. Jennifer stood behind him with this wounded expression that would have won her an Oscar, explaining how inappropriate it was for me to use that kind of language with Hunter. Dad's face went red and he demanded I apologize. "For what?" I asked. "For telling the truth." "For being disrespectful to Jennifer and setting a bad example for the kids," he said. I told him I wasn't apologizing for anything. That's when Jennifer's mask slipped for just a second. She commented how maybe it was time I started acting like part of the family instead of some entitled teenager. That night, I found Paisley in my room again, this time going through my desk drawers. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She looked up at me with those dead shark eyes kids get when they're planning something evil. "Mommy said I could look for paper for my art project. Mommy doesn't get to give permission for my room. Get out." "You're mean," she said, but she was smiling when she said it. "Mommy says you're just jealous because Daddy loves us more now." I escorted her out and locked my door. This kid was repeating stuff her mother had said about me. Jennifer was literally poisoning her kids against me. The final straw came that Sunday when I came home from Ian's to find Jennifer had rearranged my room. My desk was in a different corner, my posters had been taken down, and my bed was made with different sheets. "What the hell are you doing?" I said when I found her in the hallway. "Language," she said automatically. "I was just organizing things a bit." "Your room was starting to affect the energy of the whole house. You went into my room without permission and moved my stuff around. I knocked, but you weren't home. I thought you wouldn't mind. It looks so much better now, don't you think?" Dad appeared from the kitchen like he'd been waiting for this conversation. "What's the problem?" She was trying to help. "Maybe you should be grateful instead of starting arguments." When I said she went through my personal space without asking, Jennifer jumped in with that preschool teacher voice explaining that this was a shared living space and we all needed to be considerate of each other. My room was visible from the hallway, and frankly, it was bringing down the whole energy of the house. I pointed out that it was my room. Dad's jaw tightened. "We all live here, and we all need to contribute to making it a pleasant environment." Jennifer stepped forward with this wounded expression, saying she was just trying to help make this place feel more like a home for everyone. She was sorry if I felt like she overstepped, but maybe we could work together to find solutions that work for the whole family. I told her I didn't want her help. I wanted her to stay out of my room and stop moving my stuff around. "Watch your tongue, kid," Dad demanded. "No, you people better mind your business and stop thinking you run this place. Enough. You need to apologize to her now." I looked at Jennifer, who was standing there with this perfect victim expression, waiting for me to fold. Then I looked at Dad, who clearly expected me to back down and play along. "No. What did you just say?" I said no, I'm not apologizing for being upset. Dad's face went purple. I was being completely unreasonable. Jennifer was trying to build a life here, and I was acting like a spoiled brat. Jennifer put her hand on his arm in this supportive gesture and suggested maybe we should all take a step back and cool off. She never meant to cause problems. She just wanted us all to be happy together. She was good at playing the peacemaker while Dad did her dirty work. I told them I was going to Ian's and walked out. When I got back that night, I found a note on my door. House rules for respectful cohabitation, with a list of expectations, including 24-hour notice before having guests over, quiet hours from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., and shared responsibility for common areas. 3 weeks later, I'm minding my own business on a Tuesday night, trying to write a paper for my class. Dad's been home for exactly 2 hours, and she's already got him moving furniture around because the flow isn't right. They disappear into his room for about an hour, then call me into the living room for a family meeting. I'm thinking maybe they're finally going to announce they're moving in together officially. Boy, was I wrong. Jennifer delivers the news like she just announced she'd been crowned Miss Universe. I'm pregnant. Dad's beaming like he just won the lottery. Jennifer's glowing with this smug satisfaction that screams, "I've locked this down." Hunter and Paisley are sitting there like they've been coached on the appropriate response. And I'm thinking, well, there goes the neighborhood. That's great. Congratulations. But Jennifer's not done. She's got this whole speech prepared, delivered with the kind of fake sweetness that makes your teeth hurt, and the entitlement of someone who thinks she just won the property lottery. "We've been talking about the future," she starts, "and I can already tell this isn't going to be good. With the baby coming, we're going to need to make some major changes around here. More space, better organization, a proper nursery, adult living arrangements." Dad's nodding along, "So we were thinking maybe it's time for you to experience some independence. You know, like other people your age living as adults." Dad jumps in with the confidence of a man who thinks he runs the place. "Most people your age have moved out. It's time you have some responsibility." "You want me to move out?" I asked. Jennifer jumped in with this practiced answer. "There's this wonderful apartment I have in the city. I don't go there anymore since I'm spending most of my time here. You know, I can rent it to you at a significant discount, way below market rate." When I ask how much of a discount, she explains that market rate for that area is about $1,500, but she'd only charge me $1,200. Really a steal for someone in your situation. And what happens to this place? Well, Jennifer's got great ideas for making it more functional for a growing family. The baby will need a nursery and the kids need proper rooms. Your room would be the perfect nursery space. My room, the room I've lived in since I was 12, but wait, there's more. Also, Jennifer continued, my mother has agreed to move in temporarily to help with the baby. She'll need the guest room. I look at Dad, waiting for him to say something. Anything? Nope. He's just sitting there, nodding along to everything she says. So I decided to play along to see how far they'll go. That's interesting. I'll think about it. Jennifer's smile gets a lot tighter. Great, but you know waiting too long would be limiting everyone involved, so think fast. Okay. I texted Ian as soon as they went back to their room about needing an emergency drink run. He showed up 20 minutes later, took one look at my face. "Dude, you look like someone just shat in your cereal." "Tell me about it." I told him everything. "Classic," he said. "Nothing says family values like kicking the owner to make room for grandma." 2 weeks after the pregnancy announcement, I came home from my afternoon classes to find Jennifer in my room with cardboard boxes, packing up my stuff like I'd already agreed to move out. Not just standing in the doorway this time, actually in my room, going through my closet, wrapping up my mom's pictures in newspaper, and boxing up books like she was preparing for a yard sale. When I asked what the heck she was doing, she looked up with this bright smile, like I just walked in on her organizing a charity drive. "Hi, sweetie, I'm just helping you get started with packing. Your father and I decided it would be better to get you moved sooner rather than later, so I thought I'd give you a head start." My father and I decided. Nobody asked me what I decided. She kept that sickeningly sweet tone. "Well, honey, you've had 2 weeks to think about it, and really, what's there to think about? This is obviously the best solution for everyone." She held up one of my mom's framed pictures like she was examining it for flaws. "Besides, some of this stuff probably needs to be updated anyway. You can't hold on to childhood things forever. Put that down and get out of my room now." Now, she said in that condescending preschool teacher voice, "There's no need to be unpleasant. I'm trying to help you transition to adult living. This is exciting. Your own place. Real independence." When I repeated my demand for her to get out, Jennifer sat down the picture and straightened up. For the first time since I'd met her, the mask completely dropped. "Listen, little boy," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm pregnant with your father's child. This house needs to work for a real family, not some overgrown teenager who can't handle the idea of growing up. You can either pack your stuff like an adult, or I can have your father explain to you why this isn't negotiable anymore. This isn't your house. You don't get to pack my stuff." "Actually," she said, picking up another box and continuing like I hadn't spoken, "your father and I have discussed this extensively. We've already paid the deposit on the apartment, and you're moving out this weekend. The movers come Monday to pick up your things." Movers? They'd hired movers for my stuff without asking me. When I said they couldn't do this, she told me they already did. "The lease is signed. The deposit is paid. And frankly, you should be grateful we're handling all the logistics for you. Most parents would make their children figure this out on their own." That's when Dad walked in, and I could tell from his expression that he knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't Jennifer going rogue. This was their plan. "Dad, what the hell is this? We decided it's better to just rip the Band-Aid off. You've been dragging your feet on this decision, so we made it for you. You made it for me." Dad used that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. "Look, this is happening whether you like it or not. You can either be mature about it and work with us, or you can throw a tantrum like a child. But either way, you're moving out this weekend." I looked between them, Dad standing there like he was delivering some tough love-life lesson, Jennifer smirking behind him like she just won the lottery. And they'd obviously planned this whole thing. When I asked what would happen if I refused, Dad's face went hard. Then they'd pack my stuff for me and put it in storage. I was an adult now, and it was time I started acting like one. This house was for families, not overgrown kids who couldn't handle change. Overgrown kids. My own father called me an overgrown kid for not wanting to be evicted from my own house. Jennifer helpfully added that I had until Sunday. The cleaning lady needed time to prepare the room for the nursery furniture delivery. I pulled out my phone and started recording, asking them to say that again about moving me out of my house. Dad's face went red and he told me to put that away. This was a family discussion, not some social media drama. I kept recording and asked him to clarify. They were evicting me from this house, the house that belongs to me. Jennifer snapped that it belonged to this family, and families make decisions together. I didn't get to hold everyone hostage because of some paperwork technicality. Paperwork technicality. Property ownership was a paperwork technicality. Dad, whose name is on the deed, pure awkward silence, while Dad realized he'd never actually checked the paperwork from when Grandpa died. When he finally admitted that legally, yes, the house was in my name but started to say but, I cut him off. There was no but. Legally, this was my house, and he just told me he was evicting me from my own property. That's when Jennifer finally understood what was happening, and her face went through about 6 different emotions before settling on barely controlled panic. "That can't be right," she said slowly. "You're just a student. This student does." I showed her the phone screen. "Inherited it from my grandparents when they died. House, land, everything. All mine." Jennifer sat down hard on my bed, still holding one of my boxed-up books. "But your father, he pays for everything. Utilities, upkeep. Yeah, on my property like a tenant. He renovated this place with my mom's life insurance money to improve my house." The color drained from her face as she realized her entire plan had just imploded. "So, when you decided to evict me from my own house and turn my bedroom into your nursery without asking. Yeah, that's not going to fly." Dad was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had that dangerous edge it got when he was really pissed off. "Fine," he said. "It's your house." But I was still 21 years old, and I was still his son, and I was still going to do what he told me to do. Actually, no, I wasn't. He said we'd see about that and walked out. Jennifer stayed sitting on my bed, staring at the boxes of my stuff she'd been packing like they were evidence of a crime. She said this was insane. I couldn't just. "This isn't how families work. You're right. Families don't usually steal each other's houses." She looked up at me with pure hatred. "You little shit. You have no idea what you've just done. I am pregnant, and we need the house more than you do. Maybe you should have asked nicely. This isn't over. Good luck with that." I texted Ian immediately about deploying the nuclear option. They'd tried to pack my stuff without permission. His response came back in seconds, asking how they took the property ownership revelation. About as well as you'd expect, I told him. Dad's having an alpha male meltdown, and Jennifer looks like she just watched her master plan burn to the ground. After the attempted forced eviction, I spent the weekend doing research. Not homework, the kind of research that would help me figure out exactly how to make these people's lives as miserable as they tried to make mine. Ian came over Saturday morning with coffee and his laptop for what he called war council time. All right, what's the plan? I told him the plan. I was evicting them, both of them. Even your dad, especially my dad. He made his choice when he tried to force me out of my own house. Ian grinned. Ruthless. I like it. What do you need? We spent the morning researching tenant rights, eviction procedures, and property law. Turns out, when you let people establish residency in your house, which Dad and Jennifer had definitely done, getting them out requires proper legal channels. But when you own the property, and they're not on any lease, you've got most of the power. Ian found the relevant laws. In this state, you need to give 30 days written notice for month-to-month tenants. But if they're not paying rent and there's no lease agreement, it's considered tenancy at will and you can terminate it with notice. 30 days notice. But here was the fun part. If they refused to leave after notice, I could file for eviction and have them legally removed. When I asked about damages, like if they'd been living there rent-free, Ian found the beautiful part. I could sue for fair market rent for the entire time they'd been there without a lease, plus any damages to the property. I calculated quickly. Dad had been living there rent-free for 9 years, Jennifer and her kids for about 6 months, at market rates for a 4-bedroom house in our area. We were talking about serious money. Dad would owe me about $200,000 in back rent. Jennifer would owe about $15,000 just for the time she'd been there. Ian whistled. That's some expensive house playing. Monday morning, I went to the courthouse and filed the paperwork. Tuesday, I went to a lawyer to make sure I was doing everything by the book. Wednesday, I had the eviction notices printed up on official letterhead. Thursday evening, I waited for them both to be home, then called a family meeting in the living room. We need to talk, I said, setting the folder of legal documents on the coffee table. Dad was still in his post-superiority mode. If this is about your attitude problem, I don't want to hear it. You've been acting like a spoiled brat and it needs to stop. Actually, this is about your housing situation. Jennifer was sitting next to him, one hand on her belly like she was protecting the baby from my bad vibes. What about our housing situation? I opened the folder and pulled out the eviction notices. You're both being evicted. 30 days notice, effective immediately. The silence that followed was beautiful. Dad picked up his notice and read it like it was written in Sumerian. What the hell is this? It's an eviction notice. You have 30 days to find alternative housing and vacate the premises. He exploded. You can't do this. I'm your father, you little shit. Watch me. Jennifer screamed. That's illegal. You can't kick out a pregnant woman. Actually, I can, but we don't pay rent, she said like that was some kind of gotcha. Exactly. They were tenants at will, which meant they had even fewer rights than people with leases. Dad stood up, and I could see that vein in his forehead that meant he was about to lose his shit completely. He called this the most ungrateful, disrespectful thing I'd ever done after everything he'd sacrificed for me. He went off about how he raised me, put money into this place, and had been taking care of everything. And now he could take care of his own housing like every other adult on the planet. Jennifer was reading through the notice again, and I could see the exact moment she found the about back rent. She asked what this was about. Owed compensation for unlawful occupancy. That was the lawsuit I was filing for the rent they should have been paying this whole time. Fair market value for a 4-bedroom house, calculated monthly for the duration of their unauthorized residency. When Dad asked how much, I told him. For him, about $200,000. For Jennifer and her kids, $15,000 and counting. The color drained from both their faces. Jennifer whispered, "You can't be serious." Dead serious. But I wasn't completely heartless. They could avoid the lawsuit by vacating within 30 days and signing an agreement not to pursue any claims against the property. Dad sat back down hard and asked about $200,000. That's what it cost to live in a house like this for 9 years. Who knew? Jennifer's voice got shrill, saying this was insane. They were going to be homeless. She was pregnant. Not my problem. You should have thought about that before you tried to steal my house. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at the eviction notice like it might change if he looked at it hard enough. When he finally asked where they were supposed to go, I suggested anywhere but here. Jennifer had that apartment, right? The one she was so eager to rent to me. That's a one-bedroom, she said. We can't fit 3 adults and 2 kids in a one-bedroom apartment. 3 adults, I asked her. My father and her mother, she explained. I laughed. Oh, she thought her mother was still invited to this party. That's adorable. Dad said he couldn't do this. He didn't have anywhere to go. All his money was up in this place. His money was tied up in my place, and now he knew how it felt to be told he had to leave. Jennifer started crying, the angry, frustrated sobs of someone whose manipulation tactics weren't working anymore. She went on about how unfair this was, how they were building a life together and were going to be a family. But the baby, she wailed, the baby she got pregnant with to lock down my dad. That baby. Her crying stopped instantly, and the look she gave me was pure hatred. You don't know what you're talking about. Really? Let me guess. Birth control failure, happy accident, surprise pregnancy that just happened to occur right when you needed to cement your position in the house. Silence. Ian showed up the next morning with donuts and a shit-eating grin, asking how they took their eviction notices. Like you'd expect, I told him. Lots of crying, threats, and disbelief that actions have consequences. Your dad, too, he asked. My dad's having an existential crisis about owing me 200 grand in back rent. Beautiful, he said. Justice is a dish best served with legal paperwork. The next month was magnificent to watch. Dad tried everything. Lawyer consultations he couldn't afford to fight, emotional manipulation about being my father and this being our family home, and even attempted bribes about signing the house over to me officially and calling it even. Newsflash. I already own the house. Signing it over to me would be like giving me my own birthday present. Jennifer went full scorched earth, called my university to complain about my unstable home environment, called the police to report a domestic disturbance when I asked her to move her car, even tried to call CPS on herself, claiming I was creating an unsafe environment for children, which backfired when they pointed out that maybe she shouldn't have her kids living somewhere she felt unsafe. Finding housing for an unemployed pregnant woman, her 2 kids, a 52-year-old man with mediocre credit, and potentially a grandmother, all on Dad's construction salary, turned out to be harder than they thought. Week 4, Dad suggested. Maybe they could work out some kind of arrangement. He could pay me rent to stay, market rate, they could make it official. I said no. He started to argue, but I cut him off. Nope. You had the chance to me with respect and have a conversation like adults. Instead, you tried to force me out of my own house. Actions have consequences, but I'm your father, he said. Yeah, and you're also the guy who tried to evict me from my own property to make room for your girlfriend's mother. Father of the Year material right there. That's when the real fireworks started. Jennifer filed a complaint, claiming I was evicting her because of her pregnancy status. The hearing was beautiful. Jennifer had to explain that she was Dad's girlfriend, had been living there 6 months, had no lease, and paid 0 rent. Then I got to tell the judge how they'd tried to force me out of my own house and convert my bedroom into a nursery without my permission. The judge basically told her you can't claim pregnancy discrimination when you're being evicted for trying to illegally evict the actual property owner. Case dismissed. But the real bomb came during week 5, and you're not going to believe what happened. I was at Ian's place when Dad called, and his voice sounded weird, shaky. We need to talk, he said. About what? You've got 3 days left to move out. About the baby. Something in his tone made me pay attention. What about it? Can you come home? I need to show you something. I found Dad sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. He slid a paper across the table. Paternity test results. The baby isn't mine, he said quietly. I stared at the paper. What do you mean? Jennifer had been lying this whole time. How did he find out? She'd wanted him to sign up for better health insurance at work to cover the pregnancy. The insurance company required blood work for pre-existing conditions. They ran some genetic screening panels. Turns out he couldn't be the father. Wrong blood type. So whose baby was it? Her ex-husband's. Apparently they were still sleeping together when she started dating Dad. The whole thing was a setup. Where was she now? Upstairs. He'd confronted her this morning. She tried to claim the test was wrong, that maybe it was a mix-up at the lab. Then she tried to say it didn't matter because he'd be a better father than her ex anyway. When that didn't work, she said he was abandoning her and the baby. And how could he be so cruel to throw out a pregnant woman? He told her she had until tonight to get out, or he'd call the police and report her for fraud. She called him a heartless bastard and said this was all my fault for being a selfish little shit who couldn't handle having a real family. I almost laughed. Even caught red-handed lying about paternity, she was still blaming me. So what happens now? I asked. Dad was quiet for a long time. I screwed up bad. I chose a woman I barely knew over my own son. I tried to kick you out of your own house for someone who was lying to me from day one. Yeah, you did. I know you probably hate me right now and you have every right to, but I'm hoping maybe we could work something out. I don't have anywhere to go and I know I don't deserve any help from you, but… No, the word hung in the air between us. You made your choice. You chose her over me. You tried to force me out of my own house. You called me ungrateful and disrespectful for not wanting to be homeless. You don't get to come crawling back now that your gold-digging girlfriend turned out to be exactly what everyone except you could see she was. But I'm your father. I'm your… Yeah, and I'm your son. Didn't stop you from trying to evict me. Dad looked down at the paternity test results and said he knew he messed up. He knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he was asking anyway. I told Dad if he really wanted to know what I thought. He nodded. I think you're a 52-year-old man who got manipulated by a 30-year-old con artist because you were thinking with your dick instead of your brain. I think you were so desperate to feel young and needed that you ignored every red flag she threw up. And I think when push came to shove, you chose her over your own son. And now that it's all blown up in your face, you want me to forget that you tried to steal my inheritance and kick me out of my own house. He flinched like I'd slapped him. It wasn't like that, he started to say, but I cut him off. It was exactly like that. You just got caught. Dad was quiet for a long time, so what happens now, he asked. Now you move out as we agreed. That night Jennifer left. No big scene, no dramatic goodbye. Just packed her stuff and disappeared with her kids. Dad moved out 2 days later, rented a one-bedroom apartment across town, and took only his personal stuff. Left behind all the furniture he'd bought, all the improvements he'd made, everything he'd invested in the house that was never his. Ian came over the day after Dad left, bringing drinks and pizza. He asked, "You'll ever forgive him?" Maybe, but not today. And not because he got caught being an idiot. Fair enough, he said. So what's the plan now? Finish school, enjoy living in my own house without anyone trying to steal it. Maybe get a dog, sounds like a plan. Story 4, Walter still sets 2 coffee mugs each morning until the day he finds the toy truck that changes everything. 5:30, always 5:30. Walter Jenkins' eyes opened before the alarm, same as they had for 43 years of factory shifts, then 15 years of running his own garage. Now, 2 years into retirement and 2 years since Ruth passed, his body still obeyed the old schedule even when his mind begged for more sleep. The hardwood floor felt cold under his bare feet as he shuffled to the kitchen. October in Ohio meant the furnace would kick on soon, but for now the house held that crisp emptiness that made every sound seem too loud. The coffee maker gurgled to life. He'd said it the night before, another habit from when Ruth needed her first cup to face the day. While the coffee brewed, Walter opened the kitchen curtains. Mrs. Patterson across the street was already walking her little white dog, same time every morning. She'd wave if she caught him looking, but Walter usually turned away first. Too much effort to wave back, too many words that might follow. The coffee finished with its familiar hiss. Walter reached for 2 mugs from the cabinet, Ruth's blue one with the chip on the handle, and his plain brown one that said, "World's Best Dad" in faded letters. Sarah had given him that one 15 years ago, back when the words felt true. He poured coffee into both mugs, added cream to Ruth's just the way she liked it, black for himself, set them on their usual spots at the kitchen table, opened the newspaper, spread it between them. Then he stopped. Ruth's mug sat there steaming, cream swirling on the surface, and for a moment Walter could almost hear her voice. "Read me the good parts, Walt. Skip the doom and gloom." But the chair across from him stayed empty, and the coffee grew cold while he pretended to read about a world that seemed to keep spinning without him. 20 minutes later, same as every morning, Walter would catch himself. Pour Ruth's coffee down the sink, put her mug in the dishwasher, return to the table to eat toast that tasted like cardboard and wonder when food had stopped being worth the effort. The newspaper held the same types of stories it always did: politics, accidents, people doing things that mattered to someone. Walter read every word not because he cared, but because it filled time. The house was too quiet without Ruth's humming, her puttering around the kitchen, her voice calling from the other room about things that seemed important then and felt precious now. After breakfast, Walter would shower, dress in clean clothes, and face the question that got harder every day. What now? The garage in the back had his tools, projects half finished from when working with his hands felt like purpose instead of just motion. The living room had Ruth's chair, still angled toward the television like she might come back to claim it. The bedroom upstairs had her side of the closet, clothes he couldn't bring himself to donate and couldn't stand to see. So he'd choose the garage, always the garage, where the smell of motor oil and metal shavings mixed with the ghost of Ruth's voice calling him in for lunch, where he could pretend to be busy until the day ended and he could start the whole ritual again. The workbench in Walter's garage held 40 years of accumulated purpose. Wrenches organized by size, screwdrivers sorted by type, coffee cans full of nuts and bolts and washers that might come in handy someday. Everything in its place, except Walter himself. He'd built this space when Sarah was still in elementary school and Michael was just learning to walk. Back then, the garage was command central for family life, fixing Sarah's bicycle, teaching Michael to change oil, storing Christmas decorations and camping gear, and all the equipment of a life lived forward instead of backward. Now Walter came here because he didn't know where else to go. This morning, like most mornings, he found himself holding a socket wrench, turning it over in his hands that weren't quite as steady as they used to be. The tool felt familiar and foreign at the same time, an old friend whose language he was forgetting. 43 years I've been fixing things, he said aloud, his voice rusty in the empty garage. Cars, appliances, leaky faucets, broken toys, but I can't fix this. This, the word that had replaced so many others. This loneliness that sat on his chest like a weight. This silence that followed him from room to room. This distance between him and his children that had started the day Ruth died and grown wider with every conversation they didn't have. Walter set the wrench down and picked up a photograph from the workbench, him and Ruth on their wedding day, 42 years ago. She was 23, laughing at something he'd just whispered in her ear. He was 25, thinking he knew everything about love because he loved her so much it felt like drowning. You knew, didn't you? He asked the photograph. You knew I'd be lost without you. That's why you kept trying to get me to talk more, to open up to the kids. You were preparing them for when you wouldn't be there to translate for me. Ruth had been his interpreter with the world. She could take his grunts and nods and somehow turn them into conversations. She could smooth over his rough edges when he came home frustrated from work, help him find words when Sarah needed advice about boys or Michael wanted to know why Dad seemed angry all the time. I wasn't angry, Walter said to the photo. I didn't know how to say things the way you did. Still don't. The last real conversation he'd had with Michael was the fight. 6 months after Ruth's funeral, when Walter had been drinking too much and sleeping too little, and Michael had suggested maybe it was time to sell the house, get somewhere smaller, closer to family. This is my home, Walter had said, his voice louder than intended. Your mother and I built our life here. I'm not abandoning it because you think I can't take care of myself. Dad, nobody's saying you can't take care of yourself. We're worried about you. Sarah's worried, I'm worried. You don't call, you don't visit, you barely talk to us when we call you. I talk plenty. You grunt, you give one-word answers. You act like we're bothering you. And that's when Walter had said the thing he'd been thinking but should never have spoken. Maybe you are bothering me. Maybe I just want to be left alone to grieve my wife without having to manage everyone else's feelings about it. Michael had left that day and hadn't been back since. Sarah still called every week dutifully, but their conversations felt scripted now, careful. She'd ask how he was doing, he'd say fine. She'd mention the grandkids he'd only met twice, he'd make appropriate noises. She'd suggest he come visit, he'd say maybe soon, knowing he wouldn't. Walter returned the photograph to its place and walked to the far corner of the garage, where a tarp covered something he hadn't looked at in months. He pulled the canvas away to reveal Michael's 1967 Mustang, the project car they'd worked on together when Michael was in high school. The car was beautiful and broken, cherry red paint faded to pink in places, chrome bumpers spotted with rust, engine torn apart and spread across two workbenches. They'd spent 3 summers on this car, side by side, Walter teaching Michael everything he knew about engines and Michael dreaming about the day he'd drive it to prom. But senior year brought college applications, part-time jobs, a girlfriend who thought classic cars were stupid. The Mustang became homework avoidance, then a weekend hobby, then something they'd get back to someday. After Michael graduated and moved away for college, the car just sat, waiting for a reunion that never came. "We were going to finish this," Walter said to the empty garage. "Remember, Michael, you said we'd work on it every summer break. Then you got that internship in Chicago, then you met Jennifer, then life happened." He traced his finger along the car's dusty hood, remembering Saturday mornings when they'd both be out here by 8, Ruth bringing them coffee and sandwiches, the radio playing classic rock while they argued about the proper way to gap spark plugs. Those were the times he and Michael talked easiest, hands busy, eyes focused on the work, words coming naturally between them. Walter had taught his son everything he knew about cars, but somehow forgot to teach him everything he knew about being a man who could say what was in his heart. By 10 o'clock, Walter had run out of projects that needed doing and started making work where none existed. He cleaned tools that were already clean, reorganized parts that were already organized, swept corners that only accumulated dust because he swept them every day. The routine was his anchor and his prison. Without it, the day felt formless, dangerous. With it, each hour crawled by marked only by the completion of tasks that didn't need completing. At 11, he'd go inside for his second cup of coffee and check the answering machine. Usually nothing. Sometimes a robocall about extending his car warranty or supporting the local fire department. Once a week, Sarah's voice, "Hi, Dad, just checking in. Call me back when you get this." He'd write down her number on a scrap of paper, promise himself he'd call after lunch, then find the paper later, crumpled in his pocket, the words smeared from his sweating palms. Lunch was a sandwich eaten standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window at the neighborhood he'd lived in for 35 years. The Hendricks family next door was installing a new fence. The young couple across the street, he couldn't remember their names, had painted their front door bright blue. Life continued around him, people making changes and improvements, while he stood at his window like a curator in a museum of his own memories. The afternoon brought television news, mostly to fill the silence. Walter wasn't particularly interested in politics or weather or sports, but the voices gave the house a feeling of occupancy. Sometimes he'd find himself responding to the newscasters. "That's ridiculous," or "What do they expect?" As if they could hear him, as if he was part of a conversation instead of just witnessing one. Dinner was the hardest part. He'd heat up something simple, canned soup, frozen dinner, leftover pizza from the place that delivered, and sit at the kitchen table with his food and the day's final cup of coffee. This was when the silence felt heaviest, when he missed Ruth's voice asking about his day, her stories about the neighbors or the grocery store or the book she was reading. He'd started leaving the television on during dinner, turned toward the kitchen so he could hear it from the table. The noise helped, but it also reminded him how much of his life now was about managing solitude instead of enjoying company. Evenings were for Ruth's chair. Walter would settle into his recliner, the one he'd bought to match hers 15 years ago, and pretend to watch whatever was on television. Really, he was listening to the house, the furnace cycling on and off, the refrigerator humming, the settlings and creakings of a structure aging along with him. Sometimes he'd talk to Ruth's empty chair, just practical things at first. "Furnace is making that noise again, or misses?" Patterson's dog got loose today. But as the weeks turned to months, the conversations grew longer, more intimate. "Sarah called again today," he'd say to the chair. I should call her back, I know I should, but what am I supposed to say? That I'm fine, that I'm not fine, that I miss you so much some days I forget to breathe. The chair never answered, but Walter imagined Ruth's voice anyway, patient, loving, slightly exasperated with his stubbornness. Call your daughter, Walt. She loves you. They both love you. You're not bothering them by needing them. But needing felt like weakness, and Walter had spent 68 years believing that men solved their own problems, even when the problem was himself. By 9 o'clock, he'd climb the stairs to the bedroom, brush his teeth, and lay down on his side of the bed. Ruth's side stayed undisturbed. Her pillow still held the dent from her head, her nightstand still held her reading glasses and the book she'd never finished. Walter would stare at the ceiling and listen to the silence that used to be filled with Ruth's gentle snoring, her movements in sleep, the small sounds of a life shared. Sleep came eventually, but it never felt restful. Walter's dreams were full of conversations he should have had, words he should have said, moments when he could have been better at loving the people who loved him back. He'd wake at 5:30 to start the whole pattern again, each day a careful repetition of the day before, each routine a small victory against the chaos of grief. But even victory felt like losing when you won it alone. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October wind that stripped leaves from trees and sent them skittering across driveways like small, brown ghosts. Walter had finished his coffee and newspaper routine and was heading to the garage when he noticed the overhead door was slightly ajar. Strange, since he always made sure it was completely closed before going to bed. The wind must have caught the latch, he thought, pressing the button to raise the door fully. But as the metal panels rolled up, Walter saw something that made him pause. The tarp covering Michael's Mustang had been blown askew, exposing the rear quarter panel and revealing something Walter hadn't noticed before, a small wooden toy truck sitting on the car's trunk. He stepped closer, squinting. The truck was about the size of his fist, carved from pine and painted bright red, though the paint was faded now and chipped in places. Walter picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and felt something shift in his chest, a recognition so sudden and complete it made him sit down hard on the nearest workbench. He'd made this truck. Christmas 1987. Michael was 6 years old and obsessed with vehicles of all kinds. Walter had spent 3 weeks in this very garage, working after Michael went to bed, carving and sanding and painting a fleet of wooden trucks for his son's Christmas morning. This one was the first, the prototype. Walter remembered the excitement of planning it, sketching the design on a napkin during his lunch break at work, rushing home to test the proportions in wood. He remembered Michael's face Christmas morning, pure joy, unguarded and complete, and the way his son had clutched the truck against his chest like it was precious. "You made this for me?" 6-year-old Michael had asked, his voice full of wonder. "Course I did," Walter had replied, trying to sound casual while his heart swelled with pride. "My boy deserves the best toys, and the best toys are made by hand." Michael had slept with that truck for months, carried it everywhere, made engine noises as he drove it along windowsills and coffee tables and the arms of chairs. The paint had worn off in places from his small hands, and there, Walter traced his finger along the truck's side, were the same fingerprints he remembered, the places where Michael had gripped it tight while it was still tacky with fresh paint. But how had it gotten here? Walter tried to remember the last time he'd seen it. Michael had played with the truck for years, long past the age when other boys gave up toys. It had moved with the family from the apartment to this house, survived countless cleanings and reorganizations, somehow always finding its way back to Michael's room. Then Walter remembered the argument. 6 months ago, when Michael had come to help clean out the basement and suggested maybe it was time to sell the house. They'd found boxes of old toys, and Michael had pulled out this truck, held it for a long moment, then set it on the Mustang's trunk. "I remember this," Michael had said quietly. "You made me a whole fleet of these. I thought you were magic, that you could make anything." Walter had grunted something noncommittal, focused on sorting through boxes, unwilling to acknowledge the emotion in his son's voice. Now he wished he'd stopped what he was doing, looked at Michael, said something about how those had been good times, how proud he'd been to make something that brought his boy such joy. Instead, the truck had been forgotten in the argument that followed, left behind when Michael drove away angry, sitting on the Mustang's trunk like a small monument to all the words they hadn't said. Walter held the truck close to his chest and felt something break open inside him, not breaking apart but breaking open, like ice cracking in spring. For the first time since Ruth died, Walter cried. Really cried. Not the angry tears of frustration or the dull leaking of grief, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a man finally feeling the full weight of his losses. He cried for Ruth, gone too soon with too many words left unsaid. He cried for Michael, somewhere in Chicago building a life that didn't include his father. He cried for Sarah, dutiful and distant, trying to love a man who didn't know how to let her. But mostly he cried for himself, for the years he'd wasted believing that love was something you felt instead of something you did, something you showed with your hands instead of your voice. The toy truck sat solid and real in his palms, proof that he had once known how to love in a way that mattered. His hands had shaped this. His time had created it. His heart had guided every cut of the knife, every stroke of the brush. He had made something beautiful for his son, something that had brought joy and comfort, and the kind of security that comes from knowing your father thinks you're worth his best effort. When the tears finally stopped, Walter sat in the quiet garage holding his son's truck and feeling something he hadn't felt in months. The possibility that maybe it wasn't too late to remember how to love with his hands again. Over the next 3 days, Walter couldn't stop thinking about the truck. He'd set it on his workbench where he could see it while he puttered around the garage, and every glimpse brought back another memory. Michael at 7, racing trucks through Ruth's garden while she pretended to scold him. Michael at 10, explaining to a neighborhood friend that his dad made the best toys because he took time to get them right. Michael at 15, embarrassed by childish things but keeping the truck on his bookshelf anyway. The memories were bittersweet, full of love and loss and the recognition of how much time had passed, how much distance had grown between them. But they were also evidence of something Walter had begun to doubt, that he had been, at least sometimes, a good father. The phone rang Tuesday evening while Walter was heating soup for dinner. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID, and for once Walter picked up on the second ring instead of letting it go to voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart," he said, and immediately heard the surprise in Sarah's voice. "Dad, hi, I wasn't sure you'd be home." "Where else would I be?" Sarah laughed, a sound Walter realized he'd missed. "Good point. How are you doing?" It was their usual opening, the question that usually got a grunt and a fine before they moved on to safer topics. But today, with the toy truck visible from where Walter stood in the kitchen, he found himself saying something different. "I found something interesting in the garage," he said. "Remember those wooden trucks I made for Michael when he was little?" "Oh my gosh, yes. He was obsessed with those." "You made him like 6 or 8 of them one Christmas. He slept with them for years." "I found one sitting on the Mustang. Michael must have left it there last time he was here." Silence on the other end of the line, then, "Dad, Michael's been worried about that fight you two had. He feels terrible about the things he said. He wants to call you, but he doesn't know how to start the conversation." Walter absorbed this information, turned it over like he'd turned over the truck. "I said some things too, things I shouldn't have said. You were grieving, you're still grieving. Michael understands that." "Maybe." Walter paused, looking at the truck sitting on his counter next to his bowl of soup. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you remember me was I a good father? When you were little, I mean, before I got so." "Before you got so what?" Walter struggled for the word. "Stuck, before I got stuck." Sarah's voice softened. "Dad, you were a wonderful father. You taught us things with your hands, with your time. You were always fixing something for us, building something, making something better. You showed up to every school play, every game, every parent conference. You might not have said much, but you were always there." "I should have said more." "Maybe, but you said what you could say the way you could say it. When I was 8 and my bike chain kept falling off, you spent 3 hours teaching me how to fix it myself instead of just doing it for me. When Michael wanted to learn guitar, you researched teachers and drove him to lessons for 2 years even though you hate music." Walter smiled despite himself. "I don't hate music." "Dad, you called it organized noise for my entire childhood." "Well, it is organized noise, but it's Michael's organized noise, so it was worth supporting." They talked for 45 minutes, longer than they'd talked in months. Sarah told him about her kids, her job, her husband's promotion. Walter found himself asking questions, making comments, participating in the conversation instead of just enduring it. When they hung up, Walter heated his soup again and sat at the kitchen table with the toy truck beside his bowl. The house felt different somehow, less empty, more expectant, like it was waiting for something to happen instead of just waiting for time to pass. Wednesday morning, Walter did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He skipped his usual routine and went straight to the garage. Not to clean or organize or pretend to be busy, but to work. Really work. He uncovered Michael's Mustang completely, folding the tarp and setting it aside. The car looked worse in full daylight, rust spots he hadn't noticed, scratches in the paint, decades of dust and neglect. But underneath the deterioration, Walter could see the bones of something beautiful. Something that could be beautiful again, with enough time and care and the right kind of attention. He'd rebuilt engines before, hundreds of them, thousands maybe. He understood the language of pistons and valves, the rhythm of compression and combustion. His hands remembered what his mind had started to doubt, that he was still capable of making broken things whole. Walter pulled out his toolbox, the good one, with the precision instruments he'd accumulated over 40 years of professional work. He selected a socket wrench, the same one he'd held aimlessly just days before, and began to dismantle the Mustang's engine with the careful attention of a surgeon. Each bolt he removed was a small victory against the inertia that had ruled his life for 2 years. Each part he cleaned and inspected was proof that his hands still knew how to serve something larger than his own maintenance of daily routine. By lunchtime, he'd made more progress than he'd made on anything in months. More importantly, he'd remembered something he'd forgotten, the deep satisfaction that comes from working toward a purpose bigger than just getting through the day. That night, Walter dreamed about Ruth for the first time since her funeral. In the dream, she was sitting in her chair in the living room, knitting something blue and soft while he worked on the Mustang's engine spread across their coffee table. It should have been absurd, an engine in the living room, oil stains on Ruth's good carpet, but in the dream it felt perfectly natural. "You're making progress," she said without looking up from her knitting. "Engine's in worse shape than I thought," Walter replied, his hands moving confidently among the parts even though he couldn't quite see what he was doing. "But the foundation is solid, just needs attention." "I wasn't talking about the engine, Walt." Walter looked up then, really looked at his wife for the first time in 2 years, and felt his heart break all over again. She looked exactly as she had the day before the cancer took her voice, then her appetite, then her breath, healthy and vibrant and impossibly present. "I miss you," he said, words he'd never been able to say to her photograph, words that felt too big for his waking life. "I know you do, but missing me isn't the same as being lost without me. It feels the same." Ruth set down her knitting and fixed him with the look she'd perfected over 42 years of marriage, loving but impatient, the expression of a woman who'd spent decades translating her husband's silences and wouldn't accept them anymore. "Walter Jenkins, you have spent 2 years acting like you died with me, like your life ended the day mine did, but you're still here, and that means you still have work to do." "What work?" "The kids don't need me anymore. They have their own lives, their own families. I'm just an obligation to them now." "Are you? Or are you just afraid they might need you in ways you don't know how to handle?" Walter looked down at the engine parts in his hands, but they'd changed somehow, become smaller, more delicate. They were wooden toys now, trucks and cars and planes, all in different stages of completion. Some painted, some not, some perfectly formed, and others clearly first attempts. "I used to know how to love them," he said, "when they were small and their needs were simple. Toys, bikes fixed, someone to cheer at their games. I could do those things. Love doesn't get more complicated, Walt. People do. But the love is the same. It's still about showing up, still about paying attention, still about offering what you have instead of worrying about what you don't." Walter tried to respond, but the words felt stuck in his throat. In the dream, Ruth reached across the impossible distance between her chair and the coffee table and touched his hand. "You made beautiful things for them when they were children," she said. "You can still make beautiful things for them now, just different beautiful things." Walter woke with tears on his face and the taste of regret thick in his mouth. The dream felt more real than most of his waking hours, more present than the empty bed and silent house that surrounded him. He could still feel the pressure of Ruth's hand on his, still hear the certainty in her voice that he had something left to give. But in the gray light of pre-dawn Thursday, that certainty felt fragile. Walter lay in bed and cataloged all the ways he'd failed as a father, as a husband, as a man, the fight with Michael, the careful distance Sarah maintained during their phone calls, the 2 years he'd spent in this house like a ghost haunting his own life. "I don't know how to fix this," he said aloud to the empty bedroom. "I don't know how to fix any of it." But even as he spoke the words, Walter was thinking about the Mustang's engine, about the methodical process of taking something broken apart so you could understand why it stopped working. Maybe that's where he needed to start, not with fixing everything at once, but with understanding where the breakdown had begun. He got up, made coffee, and instead of reading the newspaper, Walter sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and began to write. Not a letter, not a plan, just a list of the things he wished he'd said, and the things he wished he could say, and the things he maybe still had time to get right. The list grew longer as the morning progressed, filling the front and back of the paper with words Walter had been carrying inside for years without knowing how to let them out. By the time he finished, his coffee was cold and his hand was cramped, but he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. He couldn't fix everything. He couldn't bring Ruth back or undo the argument with Michael or erase 2 years of withdrawal from his children's lives. But he could do something. One thing. One small, concrete action that would prove to himself, and maybe to them, that he was still capable of love that mattered. Walter folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket, next to his heart. Then he went to the garage and got back to work. For the next week, Walter worked on the Mustang with an intensity that surprised him. Every morning after coffee, he'd head to the garage and lose himself in the careful process of restoration. He cleaned each part meticulously, researched replacement costs online, made lists of what could be salvaged and what needed to be replaced entirely. But the real work wasn't happening under the hood. The real work was happening in the conversations Walter found himself having, with Ruth's memory, with his own doubts, with the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Michael at age 16. Full of questions Walter hadn't known how to answer then and wasn't sure he could answer now. "What if I call and he hangs up on me?" Walter asked the empty garage as he cleaned a carburetor that had been clogged for 15 years. "What if you don't call and miss your chance entirely?" Ruth's voice seemed to respond from somewhere near the workbench. "What if I try to fix this and just make it worse? What if it's already as bad as it can get, and the only direction left is better?" These weren't real conversations, Walter knew that. Ruth was gone, and the voice in his head was just his own conscience finally speaking up after 2 years of silence. But the questions felt real enough, and they demanded real answers. Thursday afternoon, Walter found himself standing in front of Michael's old bedroom, holding the toy truck and remembering all the nights he'd stood in this same doorway watching his son sleep. Michael had been a restless sleeper, always moving, always dreaming something active and energetic. Walter used to wonder what his boy was dreaming about, what adventures played out behind those closed eyelids. Now he wondered what Michael dreamed about as an adult, whether he ever thought about the father who taught him to change oil and gap spark plugs, but somehow never taught him that love didn't always sound like praise, that sometimes love sounded like silence, because the words were too big and too important to risk saying wrong. "I should have tried harder," Walter said to the empty room, "should have found the words somehow." But even as he said it, Walter remembered Sarah's voice on the phone. "You said what you could say the way you could say it." Maybe the problem wasn't that he'd been incapable of communication. Maybe the problem was that he'd given up trying, assumed that because words didn't come easily, they weren't worth the effort. The toy truck felt warm in his hands, worn smooth by years of love and play. This was communication too, not words, but intent made physical, time and skill and attention devoted to someone else's happiness. Love carved from wood and painted bright red and given freely to a child who understood its value even if he couldn't articulate it. Walter could do this. Not the talking, maybe that would come, maybe it wouldn't, but he could make things. Build things, create something that mattered to someone he loved. Friday morning, Walter drove to the auto parts store for the first time in months. The kid behind the counter, probably Michael's age, looked at Walter's parts list and whistled low. "Full engine rebuild," he asked. "This is for a '67 Mustang." "My son's car," Walter said, and felt something settle in his chest at the words. Not ex-son or a strange son, just son. Simple and true and worth fighting for. "Sweet ride, he helping you with the work?" Walter paused, considering how to answer. "Not yet," he finally said, "but I'm hoping he will be." The kid grinned. "Man, if my dad was rebuilding my dream car, I'd be all over that. Your son's lucky." Driving home with the back seat full of parts and supplies, Walter found himself thinking about luck and choice and the difference between them. Michael wasn't lucky to have a father working on his car. Walter was choosing to work on it. Choosing to believe that some bridges could still be crossed, some conversations could still be had, some love could still be expressed through the language of hands and time and careful attention to detail. That evening, Sarah called again. This time, Walter answered on the first ring. "Hi, sweetheart. How are those grandkids of mine?" Sarah laughed, clearly delighted by his enthusiastic greeting. "They're good. Emma lost her first tooth yesterday and Jake scored 2 goals in his soccer game. They keep asking when Grandpa is going to come visit." Walter felt his chest tighten. He'd met Sarah's children twice, once when Emma was born, once when Jake turned 5. Both visits had been awkward, formal affairs where Walter had felt like an intruder in his daughter's life rather than a welcome addition to it. "Maybe soon," he said, then surprised himself by adding, "I've been working on something I think they might like to see." "Oh, what kind of something?" Walter looked through the kitchen window toward the garage, where Michael's Mustang sat half-assembled but somehow more hopeful than it had in years. "It's a surprise," he said, "but I think it might be worth the wait." Saturday morning brought the kind of crisp October day that made Walter remember why he'd fallen in love with Ohio 40 years ago. The leaves were turning serious colors now, deep reds and bright golds that caught the light and held it like stained glass. Perfect weather for working with the garage door open, for letting the outside world back into his carefully controlled space. Walter had been at the Mustang for 3 hours when he heard footsteps on the driveway. He looked up to see Mrs. Patterson from across the street, walking hesitantly toward the garage with something in her hands. "Morning, Walter," she called. "Hope I'm not bothering you." Walter set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag. Mrs. Patterson was probably Ruth's age, a widow herself who'd lived across the street for 20 years. Ruth had been friendly with her, coffee visits, shared gardening tips, the kind of neighborly relationship Walter had always appreciated but never actively maintained. "Morning, Alina. What can I do for you?" She held up a covered dish. "I made too much lasagna last night and I thought you might like some. Ruth always said you were partial to Italian food." The mention of Ruth should have stung, but somehow it didn't. Instead, Walter felt grateful that someone still spoke her name aloud, still remembered the small details of who she'd been. "That's very kind of you," he said, accepting the dish. "Would you like to see what I'm working on?" Alina's face lit up. "Oh, yes. Ruth used to tell me about this car, how you and your son worked on it together." Walter led her to the Mustang, feeling oddly proud to show off his progress. The engine bay was clean now, all the parts laid out on towels in careful order. It looked like purpose, like something worth doing. "My goodness," Alina said, leaning closer to examine his work. "This is quite an undertaking. Are you planning to get it running again?" "That's the idea. It's been sitting here for 15 years, waiting for someone to pay attention to it." Alina nodded knowingly. "Sometimes things just need someone to believe they're worth saving." They talked for 20 minutes, about the car, about their gardens preparing for winter, about the changes in the neighborhood over the years. It wasn't deep conversation, but it was human contact that didn't feel obligatory or careful. When Alina left, Walter realized he was smiling for the first time in weeks. Sunday afternoon, Walter did something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He looked up Michael's phone number and dialed it before he could talk himself out of it. The phone rang 4 times before Michael's voicemail picked up. "Hi, you've reached Michael Jenkins. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Walter almost hung up. Almost decided this was a sign that he should stick to working on the car and forget about working on the relationship. But something about hearing his son's voice, older now, more confident than Walter remembered, made him stay on the line until the beep. "Michael, it's your father. I found something of yours in the garage. That wooden truck I made you when you were 6. You left it on the Mustang last time you were here." Walter paused, trying to find words that felt true without feeling too vulnerable. "I've been thinking about that Christmas when I made you those trucks. You were so excited, and I was so proud to make something that made you happy. I'd forgotten that feeling until this week." Another pause. Walter could hear his own breathing, loud in the quiet garage. "Anyway, I'm working on the Mustang, rebuilding the engine. I know it's been sitting here for a long time, but I think it's still worth saving. Maybe we both are." Walter's voice cracked slightly on the last words. "I miss you, son. I miss us. Call me back if you want to talk, or don't. But know that I'm thinking about you, and I'm sorry for the things I said when I was hurting too much to think straight." Walter hung up and sat in the silence of his garage, feeling emptied out and filled up at the same time. He'd said the words. Not all of them, not perfectly, but he'd said something true and important to his son. Whatever happened next was up to Michael. The rest of Sunday passed in a haze of careful work and careful hope. Walter cleaned parts, checked measurements, made notes about what needed to be ordered and what could be repaired. But underneath the mechanical focus, he was listening. Every car that passed on the street made him look toward the driveway. Every phone ring made his heart speed up. Michael didn't call Sunday, or Monday, or Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Walter was beginning to think he'd miscalculated everything. Maybe Michael really was done with him. Maybe some bridges were burned too completely to rebuild. Maybe a voicemail about toy trucks and engine parts wasn't enough to overcome 2 years of silence and hurt feelings. But Wednesday afternoon, while Walter was grinding valves and trying not to think about phone calls that didn't come, his cell phone rang. The number wasn't one he recognized, but something made him answer anyway. "Dad." Walter nearly dropped the valve he was holding. "Michael?" "Yeah, it's me. I got your message. Sorry it took me a few days to call back. I had to. I needed to think about what to say." "That's okay, I understand." Silence stretched between them, not hostile but careful. Walter could picture his son the way he'd been at 25, serious and thoughtful, always weighing his words before speaking them. "The truck," Michael finally said. "I remember carrying it everywhere when I was little. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. You slept with it for months. Years, actually. I hid it under my pillow when I got older, when I thought I was too old for toys, but I never stopped loving it." Michael's voice softened. "I never stopped loving that my dad made it for me." Walter felt his throat tight. "I made you 8 of them that Christmas. Took me 3 weeks, working every night after you went to bed. I still have them, all of them, in a box in my closet. Jennifer thought I should throw them away when we moved in together, but I couldn't do it. They're not much to look at now, I bet." "They're perfect," Michael said firmly. "They're proof that someone thought I was worth their best effort." The conversation continued for 45 minutes. Not the deep, healing dialogue Walter had imagined, but something better. A real conversation between two adults who shared a history and were willing to acknowledge that the history mattered. When they hung up, Michael had promised to think about driving down the following weekend to see the Mustang. No guarantees, no dramatic reconciliation, just the possibility of shared time in a garage working toward something together. Walter returned to the engine with hands that felt steadier than they had in months. He wasn't fixed yet, and neither was his relationship with his son. But they were both works in progress now, and progress felt like enough to build on. Friday afternoon, Walter was adjusting the timing on the Mustang's rebuilt engine when he heard a car door slam in the driveway. He looked up to see a blue Toyota parked behind his pickup, and his heart did something complicated when Michael climbed out of the driver's seat. His son looked older than Walter remembered, heavier around the middle, lines around his eyes, hair showing gray at the temples. But he moved with the same careful precision Walter remembered, and when their eyes met across the garage, Michael's face showed the same mix of hope and caution that Walter felt in his own chest. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, son, you made good time. Left Chicago early, wanted to beat the traffic." Michael stepped into the garage, hands in his pockets, looking around at the organized tools and parts. "This looks different than I remember. Cleaner. Been working on it pretty steady for 2 weeks. Turns out I needed a project." Michael walked to the Mustang and ran his hand along the fender. The car looked nothing like it had when he'd left it engine complete, body panels cleaned and primed, chrome polished to a dull shine. "My God, Dad, you rebuilt the whole engine." Seemed like the thing to do, been sitting here waiting long enough. They stood on opposite sides of the car, father and son, looking at the work Walter had done and feeling the weight of all the work they still needed to do on themselves. "I brought something," Michael said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small wooden truck, bright red, paint slightly faded, edges worn smooth by years of handling. Walter recognized it immediately. "That's the first one I made, the prototype. I've carried it in my pocket every day since you called, wanted to remind myself of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" Michael looked up from the truck, met his father's eyes directly. "That you loved me enough to spend 3 weeks making me perfect toys, that you showed up to every game, every school play, every parent conference. That you taught me to work with my hands, to take pride in doing things right, to believe that problems have solutions if you're willing to put in the effort." Walter felt his chest tighten. "I also taught you that men don't talk about their feelings, that asking for help is weakness, that the only acceptable response to pain is silence." "Yeah, you taught me that too. But maybe that's because it's what your father taught you and his father taught him. Maybe we can teach ourselves something different." Walter picked up a wrench, not because he needed it but because his hands needed something to hold. "I don't know how to do this, Michael. I don't know how to be the kind of father who talks about feelings and asks for forgiveness and says the right things at the right time. Neither do I. I don't know how to be the kind of son who calls every week and visits for holidays and doesn't carry grudges for months, but maybe we can figure it out together." Michael set the wooden truck on the Mustang's dashboard, right where a driver could see it. "What do you say we start the engine? See if all your work paid off?" Walter nodded and climbed into the driver's seat. The key turned easily, and the engine caught on the second try. It wasn't perfect. There was a slight hesitation in the idle, a whistle from somewhere in the intake, but it ran. After 15 years of silence, the Mustang ran. "Listen to that," Michael said, grinning. "She's got a voice again." Walter revved the engine gently, listening to the rhythm he'd worked 2 weeks to perfect. "Still needs some tuning. Probably take another few weekends to get her running really smooth. Good thing I've got some vacation time saved up." They stood together in the garage, listening to the Mustang's engine and feeling something shift between them. Not healing exactly, not yet, but the beginning of healing. The recognition that some things broken could be rebuilt if you were willing to take them apart first, understand how they worked, put them back together with patience and care. "Michael," Walter said over the sound of the engine, "I'm sorry about what I said after your mother died, about wanting to be left alone. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I know, Dad, and I'm sorry for pushing you to sell the house. I was worried about you, but I went about it wrong." Walter turned off the engine, and the garage fell quiet except for the sound of cooling metal and 2 men breathing. "I miss her every day, your mother. But I don't want to disappear with her. I want to be here for you and Sarah, for the grandkids I barely know. I just don't know how to start." Michael walked around the car and put his hand on his father's shoulder. "Maybe you already have started. Maybe this." He gestured toward the rebuilt engine, the organized garage, the wooden truck on the dashboard. "Maybe this is how you start. By doing what you know how to do and trusting that love will find a way to show itself." That evening, Walter and Michael sat in the living room after dinner, takeout pizza eaten at the kitchen table while they planned the Mustang's next phase of restoration. It was the first time Walter had used the living room for anything other than watching television alone, and having Michael in Ruth's chair didn't feel wrong the way Walter had expected. It felt like the room was remembering its purpose. "Tell me about the grandkids," Walter said, settling into his own recliner with a cup of coffee. "Sarah talks about them, but I don't really know them." Michael pulled out his phone and showed Walter pictures: Emma at 7, gap-toothed and grinning; Jake at 9, muddy from soccer practice but holding up a trophy. "Emma's the artist. She draws constantly, carries a sketchbook everywhere. Last month she drew a picture of our family, and she included you even though she's only met you twice. She included me, drew you in a garage working on a car. When I asked her why, she said Sarah told her that Grandpa builds things for people he loves." Walter studied the photo of his granddaughter, trying to memorize her face. "I'd like to build something for her, for both of them, if you think they'd like that." Dad, they'd love that. They ask about you all the time. When are we going to see Grandpa? Why doesn't Grandpa come visit? I never know what to tell them. Tell them Grandpa was lost for a while, but he's finding his way back. They talked until nearly midnight, about the children, about Michael's job, about Ruth, and the ways they each missed her differently. Walter learned that Michael had been promoted to senior engineer, that he was thinking about buying a house, that he'd kept every tool Walter had ever given him even though he rarely had time to use them. I want to teach them what you taught me, Michael said as they prepared to call it a night. How to use tools, how to fix things, how to take pride in work done well. But I also want to teach them things you never taught me. How to talk about feelings, how to ask for help, how to say I love you without needing a special occasion. Walter nodded. I'd like to learn those things too. Maybe we can figure them out together. Saturday morning, they worked on the Mustang side by side, father and son, teacher and student roles shifting back and forth as they tuned the carburetor and adjusted the timing. Walter found himself explaining things he'd never bothered to explain before, and Michael found himself asking questions he'd been too proud to ask as a teenager. Why did you always work alone when I was growing up? Michael asked as they tested the idle's speed. I wanted to help, but you always seemed to prefer doing things yourself. Walter considered the question carefully. I thought I was protecting you from frustration. Cars can be stubborn, and I didn't want you to get discouraged when things didn't work right the first time. But really, I think I was protecting myself from looking incompetent in front of my son. You never looked incompetent to me. You looked like you could fix anything. I wanted you to think that, needed you to think that, I guess. But maybe what you really needed was to see me struggle sometimes, to watch me figure things out instead of just seeing the finished result. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of shared quiet that felt productive rather than empty. When the carburetor was finally tuned to Walter's satisfaction, they took the Mustang for its first drive in 15 years. The car handled beautifully, smooth acceleration, crisp steering, the deep rumble of a well-tuned V8. But more than that, it felt like vindication. Proof that patience and skill and refusal to give up could bring something back from the edge of abandonment. She drives like new, Michael said as they pulled back into the driveway. Better than new, maybe. You did incredible work, Dad. Walter turned off the engine and sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel. It felt good to have a purpose again, to work toward something besides just getting through the day. Maybe that's what we both needed, a reason to believe that broken things can be fixed. Sunday afternoon, before Michael had to drive back to Chicago, they walked through the house together. Walter showed his son the rooms he'd been avoiding, the bedroom where Ruth's clothes still hung in the closet, the basement where boxes of family photos waited to be sorted, the spare room that had been earmarked for grandchildren who never came to visit. I've been thinking about selling, Walter said as they stood in the spare room. Not because I have to, but because maybe this house is too big for the life I'm living now. Where would you go? I don't know yet. Maybe somewhere closer to you and Sarah. Maybe somewhere with a smaller garage but a bigger guest room. Walter looked around the empty space. Your mother always wanted this room to be full of grandchildren's voices. Maybe it's time I figured out how to make that happen. When Michael left Sunday evening, they hugged goodbye, awkwardly at first, then with the fierce intensity of two men who'd almost lost each other and weren't willing to let distance grow between them again. I'll call you this week, Michael promised, and I'll come back next month. There's still work to do on the car. There's still work to do on a lot of things, Walter replied, but we've got time. Standing in his driveway, watching his son's taillights disappear around the corner, Walter felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years, hope for tomorrow. Not just hope that he'd survive it, but hope that he'd live it. That he'd find ways to matter again, to contribute, to love the people who loved him back. The wooden truck sat on his workbench where Michael had left it, next to a list of projects they'd planned together. The Mustang sat in the garage, ready for its next phase of restoration. The phone held Sarah's number, waiting for him to call with an invitation to visit, to meet his grandchildren properly, to start building the relationships he'd been too afraid to nurture. Walter picked up the truck and turned it over in his hands, feeling the smooth wood, the careful curves, the evidence of time spent in service of love. He'd made this with his hands 30 years ago, but somehow it felt like he was making it again now. Making it new. Making it matter. Tomorrow he'd call Sarah. Tomorrow he'd start planning visits and projects and the careful work of rebuilding a family that had been damaged but not destroyed. Tomorrow he'd continue the slow process of coming back to life. Tonight he'd sit in his chair and talk to Ruth, not to her photograph this time, but to her memory, her presence, the part of her that lived on in his hands and his heart and his willingness to keep trying. "I think I'm going to be okay," he said to the quiet house. "Not right away and maybe not completely, but okay enough to matter again, okay enough to love." The silence that answered him felt different now, not empty but expectant. Full of possibility instead of loss. The weight of it still pressed against his chest, but now it felt like the weight of something being built rather than something being buried. Walter carried the wooden truck upstairs and placed it on his nightstand, where he could see it first thing in the morning. A reminder of who he used to be, who he could be again, and all the love he still had left to give. Story 5. Let's see how she gets back. I can still hear Darren's voice, cocky and careless, cutting through the narrow street as the rental car door slammed shut. Marissa laughed beside him, that sharp laugh of hers that always made me feel like the punchline. Their taillights flared once, then shrank into the dusk until they disappeared completely, leaving me alone in the cobblestone piazza of a town whose name I could barely pronounce. I stood there, frozen, clutching my purse like it might grow a pair of wings and fly me home. The argument we just had outside the cafe about whether I needed a break, about how tired I looked, suddenly felt like nothing compared to what they'd just done. People sitting at cafe tables turned to stare. A couple of waiters whispered to each other. An old woman shook her head like she'd seen this scene before. My mouth was still open in mid-sentence when the truth sank in. Darren had all my important things. Earlier that afternoon, when my small cross-body bag felt too heavy, he'd offered in that smooth voice, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll keep your passport and cards safe in my wallet." Safe. That word twisted inside me now like a knife. My only ID, my bank cards, my cash, all of it was with him. I wasn't just stranded. I was trapped. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed Darren straight to voicemail. I tried again. Blocked. My heart thudded against my ribs as I tapped Marissa's number. Same result. Even Darren's buddies from back home, the ones who'd tagged along on this trip, wouldn't answer me. Every attempt came back blocked. The laughter that had chased their car down the street replayed in my ears. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment joke. This was planned. I'm Eveline Harrow, 72 years old, widow of 35 years of marriage, mother of one son who I once thought was my pride and joy. I grew up in New England, built a quiet life with my husband until cancer took him too early, and spent the last decade learning to live alone. When Darren suggested I join him and Marissa for a family trip to Italy, I thought maybe this was a chance to feel close again. A chance to matter. But as I stood in that piazza, surrounded by strangers, the evening closing in humiliation, pressing hot against my cheeks, I realized the truth. This wasn't about closeness. This wasn't about family. A little girl holding her father's hand pointed at me, whispering something in Italian I couldn't understand. I turned away quickly, blinking back tears. I told myself Darren would come back, that this was just some sick attempt to scare me. But the pit in my stomach knew better. I gripped my useless phone, every blocked call staring back like a closed door. My knees felt weak, but my voice came out steady, almost too steady, as I whispered into the cooling night air. They planned this. The piazza thinned as the sky went violet and a chill crept through my cardigan. I told myself to move one foot, then the other, until I found a narrow side street with a hand-painted sign, "Internet and Cafe." The bell over the door chimed, and a young man behind the counter glanced up, kind eyes under a mop of dark hair. "Wi-Fi?" I asked, holding up my phone like a white flag. He nodded, slid me a slip of paper with a password, and pointed to a dusty computer in the corner. I took the seat, set my purse on my lap, and breathed until my hands stopped trembling. I opened my email, first old habit from years of paying bills at the kitchen table in Vermont. There, stacked like drifted snow, were messages I hadn't seen, notes from my book club, a sale from the hardware store back home, and then a string of family subject lines that made my stomach tighten. One from my cousin Nora, checking in about Auntie Darren, says, "You've been getting confused. Another from my late husband's brother, terse and careful. We're here if you need help managing decisions. And one from Darren, sent to relatives and copied to me like an afterthought. Mom's been showing signs of dementia. We're monitoring. If she goes missing or calls with wild stories, please loop me in. I stared at the words until they blurred. Back home before this trip, Darren had stood in my kitchen with a spreadsheet and a reassuring smile. We should move the house into a trust, Mom. Easier to manage your estate, protects you. He'd tapped the page like a TV financial guru. It's just paperwork. It's my home, I'd said, and I am not done living in it. He'd sighed, patient, put upon. Marissa had set down her glass on a coaster, like the conversation itself might leave a ring. We're trying to help, she'd said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'd brushed it off as overreach. Now in a rented chair that wobbled when I shifted the picture sharpened the trust. The trip, the careful way Darren had taken my passport for safekeeping the blocked calls. This wasn't a prank. It was a case they were building, paper by paper, story by story, until the only sane conclusion was the one that erased me. The barista set a tiny cup of espresso by my elbow. For you, he said softly, as if he'd read the screen. Grazy, I managed. I scrolled again, slower, letting the lines cut their paths. They didn't just want me frightened or stranded in some picturesque town that would make a neat anecdote at parties. They wanted a record. They wanted consent without asking. They wanted my voice to sound unreliable before I ever opened my mouth. My fingers tightened around the mouse until it clicked against the wood in the glare of the monitor. My face looked older, yes, but steady. I pressed a palm flat to the glass as if I could hold the words in place and keep them from spreading. They don't just want me stranded, I thought. They want me erased. The next morning, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I walked into a little pawn shop tucked between a shoe repair stall and a tobacco stand, slid my wedding ring across the counter, and waited while the man waited in his palm. That gold band had been on my finger for 50 years, through births and funerals, holidays and heartbreaks. Now it bought me just enough euros to last a week. I found a room above a bakery on Via Roma. The ceiling slanted so sharply I had to duck to reach the bed, and the wallpaper peeled in strips like old bandages. But it was dry, and the smell of warm bread drifted through the floorboards each dawn, reminding me that life went on even if mine felt like it had ended. Culture shock hit me like a cold shower. I didn't know the bus system couldn't understand the chatter in the cafes, and the little cash I had vanished faster than I could count it. I stood in line at the U.S. Embassy hotline kiosk, praying for help. The woman's voice on the other end was polite but firm. Ma'am, without valid ID, we cannot issue travel documents. My passport was still in Darren's wallet. Words spread faster than I realized. At the cafe downstairs, I caught whispers behind half-raised menus. La Mater Americana, Abandonada, the abandoned American mother. Some watched with pity, others with curiosity, as though I were a headline in their morning paper. My cheeks burned every time I passed their tables. One evening, when the coins in my pocket barely covered a coffee, a priest in a threadbare cassock stopped me outside the piazza. His name was Father Luca. He pressed a small bag into my hands, bread, cheese, and apple, and spoke softly. For now his kindness nearly undid me, but he had a parish to care for, and I knew he couldn't carry me forever. That night I stared at the cracked ceiling of my attic room. The easy option would have been to call old friends in Boston. I could already hear their voices. Eveline, how could your own son do this? The shame tightened around my throat. I couldn't bear to let anyone know I had raised a boy who would leave his mother stranded like lost luggage. I was nobody here, no phone, no family, no papers. Yet maybe that anonymity carried a kind of freedom. The next morning, as I trudged to the bakery, I noticed a faded bus schedule tacked to a pole. One word leapt out at me like a lifeline. Greece. I stood there, staring at it, my heart thumping. If I'm already nobody to them, why not start over somewhere they'll never find me? The decision was reckless, but I didn't have much left to lose. I scraped together the last of my coins, bought a ticket, and boarded a night bus heading east. Then another. And another. I rode ferries across black water that smelled of salt and diesel, huddled against the window as strangers dozed around me. I fueled myself with bitter coffee from vending machines, and the stubborn belief that forward was the only direction left. By the time we rolled into Greece, my body felt hollow. Days blurred into each other. I hadn't eaten more than scraps of bread and apples for nearly a week. When I finally stumbled off a small local bus into a coastal village, the sunlight was too bright. The air was thick with the smell of olives and sea spray. I walked a few steps down a dirt road lined with stone walls, and then my legs simply gave out. I remember the dry earth against my cheek, the groan of cicadas, and then voices, urgent, unfamiliar. A pair of hands rough from years of labor lifted me gently. When I came to, I was lying on a narrow bed in a whitewashed room, a bowl of broth cooling on the nightstand. An elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a knot sat beside me murmuring words I didn't understand. A man just as weathered stood in the doorway holding a glass of water. Drink, he said, the accent thick but the meaning clear. Their names were Despina and Manali's, farmers. I gathered, though the details came slowly through gestures, smiles, and the occasional word we both recognized. Our conversations were clumsy, filled with pantomime, me miming thank you, Despina laughing as she pressed another spoonful of soup into my hand. One afternoon, as I sat propped by pillows, I noticed a framed photo on the dresser. A young woman in a graduation gown, beaming her arm looped through a man's. Despina followed my gaze, touched the picture gently, and said one word in halting English Australia. The look in her eyes said the rest. Their daughter had left. They too had been left behind. Something shifted in me then. A quiet recognition that night as the sea wind drifted through the shutters and Despina tucked a blanket around my shoulders. I whispered into the dark. Maybe I was meant to land here. Days slipped into weeks, and my body learned rhythms it hadn't known in years. At dawn, I followed Despina to the chicken coop scattering feed, as the hens flapped and fussed around my ankles. By mid-morning, I was in the groves, with Manali's tugging nets under the olive trees and feeling the sting of sun on my shoulders. My hands toughened my back, ached in ways that oddly felt like healing instead of breaking. Despina kept me close in the kitchen, showing me how to stretch dough for savory pies, how to cure olives until they lost their bitterness. We laughed our way through the language barrier, me pointing, her shaking her head, and correcting, both of us ending up in stitches over the simplest mistakes. Somewhere between the flour dust and the olive oil, I began to feel less like a burden and more like, well, family. It surprised me how the work changed me. My arms grew stronger, my breathing steadier. I caught sight of myself in a cracked mirror one afternoon, and for the first time in years, I didn't just see an old widow. I saw a woman still very much alive. When the chores quieted, I pulled out the little sketchbook I'd stuffed in my purse back in Vermont. I started drawing first the gnarled trunks of the olive trees, then the way the sea bent light into silver, then Despina's hands as she kneaded bread. My pencil felt clumsy at first, but soon the lines came smoother, the pages filling with color and shape. One evening, Manali's wandered past the table where I sat, bent over a drawing. He leaned on his cane, squinting at the page, then nodded slowly. Good. He said the word thick with accent but clear enough. He tapped the sketch, then pointed toward the village. Market. I laughed, shaking my head. Sell my drawings. The idea felt absurd, but Manali's was insistent. And so the following Saturday I found myself behind a makeshift stand, my sketches clipped to a line with wooden clothespins, the smell of fresh figs in the air. At first people glanced politely and kept walking. Then a couple stopped the woman tugging her husband's sleeve. They leaned close, whispering, then handed me a few euros in exchange for a sketch of the sea. My hands trembled as I folded the bills. For the first time in decades, I had earned money by my own hand. The pride that rose in me was the same kind I'd felt before my husband's illness, before years of caregiving had narrowed my world. This pride was different. It was mine, alone. That afternoon, a tourist with an American accent studied one of my drawings, then looked me straight in the eye. Would you take a commission? I exhaled, heart pounding. I can survive on my own terms. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I finally gathered the courage to open my email again. Despina had gone to church. Manali's was napping in the shade, and I sat alone with my sketchbook closed, the weight of unfinished thoughts pressing down on me. I'd avoided my inbox for weeks, afraid of what it might hold, but burying my head in the sand wouldn't change the truth. The messages loaded slowly on the old laptop at the village cafe, and there it was, right at the top, A note from Clara Whitman, my lawyer friend back in Vermont. Eveline, I don't know what's going on, but Darren filed paperwork to place your house in a trust. He's claiming you're showing signs of mental decline. The bank already has copies. Call me if you can. I read it 3 times before the words settled. My house, the old clapboard home where my husband and I had raised Darren, where I'd planted roses every spring, that was supposed to be my anchor. Scrolling further, I found the part that nearly knocked the wind out of me. Darren had already used the house as collateral for a business loan. My hand shook so badly I nearly tipped my coffee. Leveraged. My home, my security, all the sweat and memory baked into those walls treated like chips at a casino table. I walked back to the farm in a fog, the sound of my own shoes against the gravel sharp in my ears. Going back now could mean walking straight into Darren's trap. They'd spin the story, hold up their paperwork, say I was confused, unfit, lost. That night, I told Despina in halting words and gestures. She frowned, patted my hand, then said a name, Lydia, niece, Athens, lawyer. 2 days later, I found myself in a cramped office above a bakery and the city papers spread across the desk while Lydia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, translated the legal landscape for me. She showed me how to file protective notices, how to update my will from abroad, how to lock down the assets Darren thought he'd already pocketed. When she slid the preliminary document across the desk, I signed it with a steady hand. If Darren wants a fight, I murmured, pressing the pen firmly against the paper, I'll be ready. By late summer, the market stalls felt like home. My sketches had turned into watercolors and watercolors into framed pieces that tourists carried back to Germany, France, even the States. I'd learned to barter with fishermen, laugh with children chasing stray cats, and accept compliments in 3 languages. For the first time in years, I was not just surviving, I was thriving. That morning the air shimmered with heat, the smell of roasted nuts and sea salt curling through the square. I was arranging a fresh set of paintings when I heard it, the purr of a car engine that didn't belong, sleek, polished out of place among donkey carts and scooters. I turned and there they were, Darren in sunglasses, Marissa on his arm, both stepping out of a rented Mercedes as though they owned the village. For a heartbeat, my knees threatened to buckle, but then I caught my reflection in the glass of a frame, sun brown skin hair tied back with a scarf, eyes clear, not the mother they'd abandoned. A different woman. Mom. Darren started with a practiced sigh. Enough of this drama, let's go home. The house, the accounts will handle everything. Home, the words soured on my tongue. I set down the canvas I was holding slow and deliberate. You mean the house you tried to steal? Marissa's lips curled, her perfect manicure glinting as she adjusted her bag. You were never supposed to find out. I reached beneath the table and pulled out a leather folder Lydia had helped me prepare. I laid the documents flat, the revised will, the property protections filed in Vermont, and the partnership papers tying me legally to the farm here. Each page a nail in the coffin of their scheme. Darren shifted shoulders, tightening under his linen shirt. He looked less like the boy I raised and more like a cornered man. You don't have any leverage anymore, I told them quietly but firmly. Not over me, not over my life. The square had gone silent around us. Even the vendors nearby pretended not to watch, though every ear strained for the next word. I met my son's eyes, steady as stone. You left me in Italy to break me, I said, my voice carrying farther than I meant. Instead, you set me free. When Darren and Marissa's rental car finally vanished down the coastal road, the square exhaled with me, a weight I'd carried for decades. Guilt silenced the belief that I owed my son every last piece of myself, lifted clean off my shoulders. In the weeks that followed, I made the separation official, not a divorce from a husband, but from my own child. Lydia drew up the paperwork with quiet efficiency, her pen moving across the page as though she'd seen 100 versions of this heartbreak before. I signed my name with steady strokes, no hesitation. I updated my will. The Vermont house, once it was secured and later sold, would not line Darren's pockets. Instead, its proceeds would fund a scholarship for older women who dared to chase new beginnings abroad, women like me, who had been told their lives were already finished. It felt almost wholly rewriting the script. For years, I'd lived with a muted voice. I'd raised Darren alone after his father passed, worked double shifts, paid tuition bills with trembling hands, and bit my tongue when his words cut deep. I told myself he'd grow out of the selfishness, that someday he'd see me as more than the background figure making sure the lights stayed on. But he hadn't, and maybe that was the point. Love doesn't mean servitude. Motherhood doesn't mean erasure. Now every choice I made was mine. Every brushstroke of my paintings, every coin exchanged at the market, every olive I plucked from a branch was a stitch in the fabric of a life I'd reclaimed. I found myself smiling more often, real smiles that reached my eyes. I slept soundly, the kind of rest that comes when fear no longer rattles the windows of your soul. And when tourists bought my paintings, I no longer thought of it as survival. It was proof I could create something beautiful and have it valued. One evening, as the sun spilled gold across the groves, I sat on the porch of Despina and Manalise's farmhouse. A cup of tea warmed my hands and my sketchbook lay open on my lap. The olive trees stretched out before me, their leaves shimmering like silver in the breeze. I dipped my pencil, drew the horizon, and felt peace settle over me like a quilt. They thought leaving me behind was the end, I whispered into the sunset. But at 72, I finally discovered the beginning. Story 6, I read it. My name is Layla. I'm 34 years old, live in Austin, Texas, and I work as a corporate attorney at a major firm. I do well for myself. No husband, no kids, just me and a spoiled orange tabby cat named Diesel. But despite being child-free, I've helped raise children, specifically my sisters. My younger sister Brielle is 31. She's a single mom of 3. Eli is 10, Hazel is 8, and Rowan is 5. Their father, I won't even dignify him by calling him anything more, disappeared when Rowan was still in diapers. Brielle always had this artsy bohemian vibe going on. Think oil paints, vintage dresses, and grand visions of opening her own gallery one day. But visions don't pay bills. And Brielle, she's never been good at execution. So I stepped in, I always have. I bought diapers when she couldn't. I paid for school supplies. I sent money when her fridge was empty. I've covered overdue bills, groceries, utilities. 2 years ago, her car completely died. I footed the bill to get it running again. And then again 6 months ago. I didn't even blink when she called me crying about needing help with the mortgage. I made an agreement with the mortgage servicer and started paying it from my account. We agreed it would just be temporary. That was 8 months ago. This year she wanted to do something special for Easter. A big family reunion. All of our cousins, aunts, uncles, her kids, even a few old family friends. She dreamed up this elaborate day at a lakeside venue just outside of town. Food trucks, an egg hunt, petting zoo, pastel color decorations, all that Pinterest-worthy stuff. But naturally she had no money. I told her I would handle it. I booked the venue in my name, paid the $3,400 deposit up front, booked full catering from a local farm to table business $2,100, reserved a balloon artist, face painter, even an ice cream cart for the kids. I made a spreadsheet to coordinate everything. And on top of all that, I still had her April mortgage payment schedule to go through. I had also arranged for a contractor to come the following week to fix the roof. A leak had developed near Hazel's bedroom and patched the drywall damage in the hallway. I didn't even tell her how much that was going to cost. I just knew it needed to get done. And then for days before Easter she called me. She sounded weirdly casual. Too casual. "Hey," she said. "So I've been thinking, I just feel like Easter should be more family-focused this year." I raised an eyebrow even though she couldn't see me. "It is family-focused, that's the whole point." "No, I mean emotionally. I just think maybe it'd be better if you didn't come." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. "I'm sorry, what?" "You could be a lot, Layla, you're intense, and your energy kind of ruins the vibe." I stared at my phone in disbelief. "I'm literally paying for the entire thing," I said carefully. "Yeah, but it's not about money," she replied smoothly. "It's about emotional energy." I was stunned. Absolutely stunned. For a second I actually wondered if I was losing it. Like maybe I'd missed something or misunderstood. But no, she was serious. She was disinviting me. I don't know what kind of twisted TikTok spirituality nonsense she had been consuming lately, but in that moment I made a decision. I was not going to beg. I was not going to argue. I was not going to try and prove my worth to someone who clearly saw me as nothing but a wallet. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "Then you won't be there either," and I hung up. What happened in the next 72 hours? Well, let's just say Easter was canceled. Permanently, I started by calling the lakeside venue. The contract was in my name. I explained the situation and canceled the reservation. They were sympathetic. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to plan a party for someone who got entitled. Refund $3,400. Next, I called the caterers. They were lovely. Refunded the $2,100 in full since we were still outside the 48-hour prep window. I canceled the balloon artist, the face painter, the ice cream cart, and the egg hunt guy. Every single one of them refunded me. Some partial, some full, but I wasn't worried about the money. I was worried about the message. I didn't stop there. I called the roofing contractor and canceled the job. I told them I'd call back when I was ready to reschedule. Then I went into my mortgage account online. Remember, I had set it up on my own and removed my cart, canceled the auto pay. Then I called the auto repair shop where her car was scheduled for brake and axle work. Work ahead arranged and put down a deposit for and canceled the appointment. They were able to squeeze in another customer in her place. Deposit refunded. Then I sent her a text, a single message. No hard feelings. I'm just preserving my energy. No response. For 2 full days silence. Then the calls started coming in, first from her. Multiple missed calls I didn't pick up. Then from my mom, Layla, what's going on? Brielle says everything's ruined. The Easter party is canceled. She says she can't afford groceries. The roof is leaking. The car is undrivable. I told my mother the truth, that I was done being used, that I had been covering her expenses like a silent benefactor for almost a year. And she repaid me by calling me intense and disinviting me from a party I paid for. I told her I was out. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply stepping back, letting her preserve her energy. The news spread quickly. Apparently Easter was ruined and she told people I had sabotaged her. But the more people learned about the actual situation, that she disinvited me after I paid for everything, the more they started to back off. One of my cousins called to say honestly, "Good for you. She's been taking you for granted forever." Even my mother, who was initially upset, admitted that Brielle needed a wake-up call. She asked if I would at least help the kids. Maybe send some groceries or school lunch money. I said yes, but directly to the school or store, never through Brielle again. As for Brielle, she tried to post some cryptic stuff on Facebook. Passive-aggressive quotes about toxic people and protecting your energy. A few people commented supportively, but most didn't say anything at all. Easter came and went, quietly. I made myself a nice brunch. I read a book on my patio. Diesel slept in my lap. It was peaceful. A few days later, Brielle sent me a long email. She said she was hurt and devastated, that I had embarrassed her and destroyed her trust, that I had overreacted and should have talked it out. I didn't respond, because here's the thing, I'm not a grudge holder, but I am a boundary enforcer. And if the price of keeping the peace is being disrespected, then it's not peace, it's quiet abuse. So now I'm quiet, I'm unavailable, I'm free. And my energy, oh, it's immaculate. Update 1. 3 days after I sent that single, silent text and canceled the life I had been subsidizing for over a year, Brielle showed up. Not at my house, not with a phone call or an apology. No, she walked right into my office building. I was reviewing a merger document, fully immersed in legalese and timelines, when I got a call from the front desk security. They were polite but hesitant. "Miss Layla, there's a woman down here with 3 children. Says she's your sister. She seems upset. Should we escort her out?" For a moment, I just sat there stunned. A big glass window behind me overlooked downtown Austin, and in that second I remember thinking she actually brought the kids. I told them to let her up. Not because I wanted to see her, but because I knew I needed to. If she had gone this far, interrupting my workday, dragging her children into a corporate law office, this wasn't just drama anymore. This was desperation dressed in indignation. The elevator dinged and there she was. Her wild, mascara slightly smudged like she hadn't slept, and all 3 kids clinging to her side. Hazel had a pink backpack on. Rowan was clutching a stuffed frog with one I'm missing. Eli just looked confused, clearly aware enough to know this was not where Easter drama should have ended up. She didn't even knock. Just barged into my office like it was a continuation of her living room rant. I closed my laptop slowly. She looked furious. "You're punishing my children," she said, like it was a fact written into law, like it was a sentence she practiced in the mirror until it sounded sharp enough to wound. But it didn't land, because it wasn't true. I didn't respond with anger, I didn't yell, I didn't defend myself. I just looked at her. She kept going rambling about how I'd stripped away their stability, how I had left her stranded, how this was cruel and vindictive. But I didn't engage. I knew that trap. I had spent years in it, being baited by emotion, guilt into responsibility, pulled into a vortex of her chaos disguised as sensitivity. I had learned that silence was stronger than any defense I could mount. The kids stood awkwardly by the door. The office was too quiet. My assistant had closed the door, probably sensing the storm brewing inside. Then Hazel spoke. She tilted her little head and asked with a voice so small it barely reached me, "Auntie Layla, are we still coming to your house on Saturdays?" And that broke me. Because yes, every Saturday for the last 2 years I had picked them up at 9 sharp. We made pancakes, blueberry for Hazel, banana for Rowan, plain with extra syrup for Eli. We played board games, we went to the park. I helped Eli with math and Hazel with reading. Rowan still needed help tying his shoes, and he'd only let me do it because I made bunny ears and a story out of it. Those Saturdays were the only time my house didn't feel empty. And Brielle had robbed me of that, or tried to. I looked at Hazel, then back at Brielle. She must have realized in that moment that she hadn't just burned a bridge. She detonated the foundation her entire life was resting on, because I wasn't the support system. I was the system. Everything she relied on financially, logistically, emotionally, had me at the center. Not because I demanded to be there, but because she kept needing me to be. And now she told the glue holding it all together that she ruins the vibe. I didn't yell, I didn't get emotional. I simply turned back to my desk and said I had a meeting in 10 minutes. She stood there for a while, maybe expecting me to cave. But I didn't. Eventually she gathered the kids and left, still muttering under her breath. But not before I saw it, that flicker of panic in her eyes. That realization that the intense sister who ruined the energy had also been the only one preventing the collapse. The office stayed quiet the rest of the day. My co-workers didn't ask. My assistant left tea on my desk like she knew I needed it. And me? I didn't cry. I felt free. Not guilt-free. That would take time. But for once, I wasn't rushing in to fix it. I wasn't offering money or time or a ride or an apology for making someone uncomfortable with my boundaries. I was just existing. Come lie, in my power. That night I went home and made pancakes, for one. And the next morning I sent a grocery delivery to their house, kid-friendly food only, no cash, no message, because those kids never asked for any of this. But as for Brielle, she made her choice. And for once in my life, I let someone else sit with the consequences of their own decisions. Update 2. It took less than a week for the whispers to turn into phone calls. One by one, the guilt-tripping started. The first came from Aunt Meredith, the self-appointed matriarch of the family, the one who never lifted a finger to help but always had opinions. She left me a voicemail drenched in concern and passive aggression, saying she just heard the most disturbing thing about Easter, and how she didn't understand how I could leave 3 innocent children without a roof over their heads. Her voice trembled with carefully curated outrage. The kind people reserved for things they only have to understand. Then came my mother, soft-spoken but heavy with disappointment. She said she loved both her daughters equally but that I was being too cold and punitive. She didn't ask for my side, not really. She asked me to make peace. Her definition of peace, of course, being that I returned to quietly shouldering everything again. Even cousin Tina, who lived out in Denver and barely saw us once a year, texted me to ask if it was true. Was I really letting the kids suffer just to prove a point? That one stung. Not because of the accusation, but because Tina had seen firsthand just a few Christmases ago how much I adored those kids. She'd see me help Rowan with his cough medicine in the middle of the night, how Hazel clung to me while we shopped for new shoes. And yet here she was parroting the version Brielle had surely peddled to anyone who'd listen. That I had abandoned them in their hour of need. That I was rich and cruel and cold. It would have been easy to spiral, to start calling everyone individually, defending myself in a dozen separate conversations. But I'd spent enough of my life managing other people's emotions. I was tired of performing sainthood just to be called selfish the moment I said no. So instead, I did something that went against every people-pleasing reflex I had spent 34 years developing. I sent a mass email. I sat down at my desk one evening, poured a glass of wine and typed it all out. Line by line, no fluff, no theatrics, just facts. I attached PDFs of the mortgage payments I made, all 8 of them. I included Venmo screenshots with labels like "Please help roof leaking" and "Can't afford Eli's meds." I listed grocery orders, gas cards, and screenshots of the school tuition I had quietly paid when Rowan was admitted to pre-K. I even included the screenshot of Brielle's text where she disinvited me from the Easter event I paid for. I ended the email with one paragraph. "I have supported my sister through every crisis. I never asked for praise. I never asked for repayment. I did it because I loved her and her children. But she made a decision to exclude me, belittle me, and weaponize her need. I'm not retaliating. I'm simply stepping away. And I hope one day she learns to stand without leaning on people she's pushed away." I hovered over send for a moment, then I clicked it, and then I did something wild. I turned off my phone for the night. When I turned it back on the next morning, my inbox was a war zone. Some apologized immediately. My Aunt Patty, who had always been the quiet one, sent a message simply saying, "I'm so sorry, Layla. I had no idea. Thank you for telling the truth." Others tried to rationalize their ignorance. Well, Brielle didn't say all that, or she must have been really overwhelmed. A few offered to pitch in and help her now that they understood what I had been covering. She declined. Of course she did. Because the thing about people like Brielle is that they don't just want help, they want invisible help. The kind they can receive without anyone knowing they ever needed it. But the real shot came that evening. An email came through with the name I hadn't seen in years, from Jules Carter. Subject: "You're not the only one she used." Jules was my mother's ex-husband. Not my father, but someone who had been in our lives for a good 5 years during my late teens. He was kind, funny, in a quiet dad joke kind of way. And more than once I'd wondered why things didn't work out between him and my mom. I opened the email, expecting maybe a polite, "Sorry you're going through this." Instead, I read something that made my skin crawl. Jules had also been sending Brielle money. He said she reached out 2 years ago, spinning stories about how she was desperate, how the kids were going hungry, and how Layla had already turned her back on the family. He said she asked for small amounts at first, 100 here, 50 there, but over time the requests grew: a sudden leak in the roof, a medical emergency for Hazel, her car breaking down on the way to school. He'd wired her money directly, no questions asked. He totaled it all up. $5,000. She had us both separately and unknowingly, propping up her lifestyle, telling each of us the other had failed her, keeping us in the dark so she could double dip in guilt and generosity. And we weren't even the only ones. Jules mentioned he'd heard from his own daughter, my former stepsister, that Brielle had once asked her for a loan too, small but still. I stared at the email, reading it twice. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the manipulation. The careful, calculated way she'd constructed a narrative where she was the perpetual victim and I was the villain. I had always suspected she was self-centered. But this was something else. And the truth was I had enabled it. By staying quiet, by solving problems in the background, by never saying no, not even when I should have. That night I opened a locked box in my closet and pulled out every spare document I had. Records of transfers, emails, old messages, even birthday cards from the kids that I'd saved. I wasn't gathering ammunition for a fight. I was building a boundary, brick by brick. I needed to know that if this ever escalated, if Brielle decided to twist things even further, I'd have the receipts, literally and figuratively. By the end of the week, the family narrative had shifted. No one was calling me cruel anymore. A few still tried to guilt-trip me for the kids' sake, but the tone had changed. Now it was more pleading than judgmental, but I didn't bend. I kept communication brief, polite, factual, and I never responded to Brielle. She never replied to the email either, never addressed it. But she did block me on Facebook, which honestly felt like the most honest thing she'd done in years, and for the first time in a very, very long time. I slept like a rock. Update 3. It's been 6 weeks since the Easter implosion, enough time for the dust to settle, for the smoke to clear, and for reality to set in for all of us. The silence between Brielle and me has remained intact. No phone calls, no texts, not even the passive-aggressive meme she used to post on her stories, just absence. I wasn't sure if that silence was resentment, shame, or just pride, but I didn't break it. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. But outside of the quiet life moved on with some sharp pivots. The first ripples of change came through the family grapevine, tiny updates trickling in not from Brielle herself, but through side channels my mom, a cousin, and old neighbor. Each piece of news added to the quiet picture. I was slowly assembling of what her life looked like post-boundary, the first thing to go with the art room. Brielle had converted the guest room in her tiny house into what she called her studio. It was more dream board than functioning workspace. A messy collage of easels and used canvases, half-dried paint stacks of vision, journals, fairy lights, and chaos. Apparently, she started selling off supplies within the first 2 weeks. One cousin saw a garage art sale posted on Facebook Marketplace. Another heard she tried consigning a few pieces of her work at a local cafe, but they politely declined after seeing the prices she wanted. Turns out when the money train stops, illusions have to be liquidated. The summer camp she had raved about for the kids, a local program filled with crafts, sports, music, and day trips, had been canceled. Not for lack of enthusiasm, but because the deposit was never paid. Eli was devastated, apparently. He had been looking forward to it since March. Hazel didn't say much, but Rowan cried for 2 days straight. My mom tried to offer a contribution, but Brielle declined. Not because she suddenly valued pride, but because I think she knew she couldn't take it without looking like a hypocrite. The most ironic shift, though, was the job. Brielle got work at a daycare, a local chain that paid modestly but offered discounted childcare, a practical choice. It was part-time, inconsistent hours, and way below what she considered her calling, but it was income. From what I heard, she wasn't happy about it. She wasn't rude exactly, but she wasn't thriving either. The glamour of the artist's identity didn't translate well into snack duty and diaper changes. Still, she showed up, and in some small way I respected that. Meanwhile, my own life settled into a rhythm, quiet or simpler. The Saturdays with the kids became monthly instead of weekly. A compromise. We'd meet at a park or the zoo or for ice cream at a spot halfway between my office and their house. Always public, always on neutral ground. No pickups, no overnights, no breakfast traditions. Just a couple of hours of laughter, sprinkles, and updates about school and friends. It was different but clean. Free of obligation. I didn't feel hollow afterward, just calm. And then the letter arrived. It wasn't in a typed envelope. No postage stamp. Just hand-delivered, folded into the flats of my front door like something too fragile to entrust to a mailbox. The handwriting on the outside was unmistakably hers, a mix of cursive loops and scratchy pressure like she'd always been caught between grace and urgency. Inside, 3 pages, lined paper. Blue ink smudged in places. It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense. No clear "I'm sorry." No bullet-pointed acknowledgments. It was a ramble, a reckoning, a confession written through tears and frustration. But it was the most honest thing I had ever seen from her. She admitted to using me, to assuming I'd always be there, to believing I somehow owed her help because I had the money, because I didn't have children of my own, because I was the successful one. That line stopped me cold. She wrote it plainly. "I guess I thought you owed it to me, because you don't have a family of your own." That sentence broke something open inside me, not because it was mean, but because it was true, not in the way she meant it, but in the way it revealed the script she'd been reading from all along. She had decided that her chaos meant more than my calm, that her role as a mother somehow made her needs more important, more noble, that my quiet life, my career, my autonomy, my Saturdays alone, was empty, disposable, available for the taking. But the truth was, I do have a family. Those kids are mine in all the ways that matter. And pancakes and report cards and scraped knees and story time. I just wasn't willing to keep sacrificing myself under the banner of unconditional love when the conditions were always changing, always demanding more, always minimizing what I gave. And she finally saw it. The letter ended without a call to action. No plea for money. No "can we talk?" Just her admitting that she needed to reevaluate who she had become and what she had allowed herself to believe. I didn't write back, not yet. I didn't know if this was a turning point or just a moment of clarity passing through a storm. I didn't trust it, but I respected it, and that was something. I kept the letter in a drawer. I see it sometimes when I'm reaching for stamps or receipts, and each time I do, I feel less angry. Brielle is learning how to survive without a safety net stitched out of my silence. The kids are adjusting too. They ask fewer questions now. They just smile when I show up with ice cream coupons and ask how many sprinkles they want. There's no more "can we come to your house?" Not because they've forgotten, but because they've learned to love the moments we have, not more than the ones we don't. I've learned too. I've learned that love without boundaries is just erosion. That help is only real when it's not demanded. That silence, while noble, can become complicity. But most of all, I've learned that stepping away doesn't make you heartless. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself. And in the quiet that followed all the chaos, I finally found something I didn't even know I was missing. Peace. Story 7. My boss fired me for something I didn't do, so I showed him what I actually found on his computer. Brennan called me into his office on a Tuesday morning, his face stone cold. He'd been acting strange all week, avoiding eye contact, whispering with HR behind closed doors. "We're letting you go," he said without preamble. Effective immediately, I stared at him confused. "What? Why?" "Sexual harassment complaint," he replied, sliding a folder across his desk. "Multiple female employees have come forward." My stomach dropped. The complaint detailed inappropriate comments I'd supposedly made to 3 co-workers, dates, times, exact quotes, all fabricated but disturbingly specific. "This is insane," I said, scanning the documents. "I never said any of this." "The investigation is concluded," Brennan said. "Security will escort you out." I'd worked at Meridian Tech for 4 years. Clean record, good reviews, never even a write-up. This came from nowhere. Walking past my cubicle to collect my things, I noticed something odd. My computer monitor was slightly askew, like someone had been using it. The keyboard wasn't in its usual position either. That's when I remembered Brennan had asked to borrow my login last week for a system update, said it needed to access my machine remotely. Security was distracted, arguing about which exit to use. I had maybe 2 minutes. I slipped back to my desk and logged in. My browser history showed websites I'd never visited, dating sites, adult content, social media pages belonging to my female co-workers. Someone had been building a digital trail to support the harassment claims, but they'd made a mistake. The activity timestamp showed I was supposedly browsing inappropriate content during my vacation last month when I was in the hospital with my dad after his stroke. I forwarded everything to my personal email, just as security returned. 3 days later, I met with a lawyer. She reviewed the evidence and smiled grimly. "Your boss made this too obvious," she said. "We can prove these accusations are fabricated, but why would he do this?" I asked. She pulled out another folder. "I did some digging. Your company is being audited by the state. Someone's been embezzling funds through fake vendor accounts." My blood ran cold. I remembered Brennan asking me to approve invoices last quarter. Vendors I'd never heard of, but he said they were legitimate. He needed a scapegoat, she continued. Someone to blame when the audit finds the missing money. But firing you for theft would require proof. Sexual harassment is harder to disprove. The lawsuit hit Meridian Tech like a sledgehammer. During discovery, investigators found Brennan's real browser history, gambling debts, desperate emails to loan sharks, and correspondence with a company called Phoenix Consulting, which existed only on paper. He'd stolen $340,000 over 2 years. The female employees who'd supposedly complained, they testified they'd never filed reports. Brennan had forged their signatures using documents from HR files. When the FBI arrested him, Brennan looked at me through the conference room window. His mouth moved silently, but I could read his lips. "You're dead." I thought he was just angry about getting caught. Then my apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, but my laptop had been tampered with. New files appeared overnight, files that would destroy my reputation if they surfaced. Someone knocked on my door at midnight. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I didn't recognize. "Phoenix Consulting sent me," she said quietly. "We need to talk about your boss." He wasn't working alone. I stared through the peephole at the woman outside my door. She was maybe 35, wearing a dark coat that looked expensive. Her hair was pulled back in a way that said business, but her eyes kept darting toward the stairs like she expected someone to follow her. "I don't know what Phoenix Consulting is." I called through the door. "Yes, you do," she replied. "You forwarded their invoices to accounts payable. Brennan told you they were legitimate vendors." My hand froze on the deadbolt. She was right. I had processed those payments. Dozens of them over the past 2 years, always small amounts. Nothing that would trigger an audit flag. What do you want? To keep you alive, she said simply. Brennan's in federal custody, but his partners aren't. They think you know more than you do. I opened the door but kept the chain latch engaged. Up close, she looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights. Who are you? Detective Rodriguez, Financial Crimes Unit. She held up her badge. I've been investigating Phoenix Consulting for 8 months. Your lawsuit cracked the case wide open. I unlatched the chain and let her in. My apartment felt different with a stranger in it, smaller. She moved through the space like she was cataloging everything. Exits, windows, places someone could hide. How much danger am I in? Depends on what you know about the Kowalski brothers. The name hit me like ice water. I'd heard Brennan on the phone with someone named Kowalski once. He'd gotten angry when he saw me listening and slammed his office door. I don't know anything about them. They think you do. Phoenix Consulting was their front. They've been laundering money through companies like Meridian Tech for years. Small amounts spread across dozens of businesses. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos. Two men who looked like they'd stepped out of a crime movie. Expensive suits, cold eyes, the kind of people you cross the street to avoid. Victor and Pavel Kowalski, they're not the type to leave loose ends. What kind of loose ends? The kind that testified in federal court. My legs gave out. I sat down hard on my couch. But I don't know anything, I just processed invoices. You process their invoices. You have access to their payment records. You can testify about the pattern of transactions. Can't the FBI get that information themselves? Some of it. But they need someone who is inside the process. Someone who can explain how the scam worked from the inside. She sat across from me, leaning forward. Here's what we know. The Kowalskis identify mid-level employees at tech companies. People with invoice approval authority but not enough seniority to ask too many questions. They compromise these employees through gambling debts, blackmail, or simple greed. Brennan had gambling debts. Exactly. Once they have their man inside, they start small. Invoices for consulting services, software licenses, equipment rentals. Nothing suspicious on its own. I thought about all those Phoenix Consulting invoices. Web development services, IT consulting, software maintenance. They'd seemed legitimate at the time. The money gets cleaned through multiple shell companies, then funneled back to their legitimate businesses. Real estate, restaurants, construction, classic money laundering. How many companies are involved? We've identified 47 so far, but we think there are more. 47 companies, hundreds of employees processing fake invoices. The scope was staggering. Why didn't Brennan just fire me normally? Why the harassment scheme? Because firing you for cause would trigger an investigation. HR would review your work, audit your approvals. They'd find the fake invoices. But if I was fired for harassment, no one looks at your work history. The company just wants you gone quietly. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Destroy someone's reputation so thoroughly that no one would believe them if they tried to expose the truth. The break-in at your apartment, Rodriguez continued. They were planting evidence. If you tried to go public with what you knew, they could discredit you completely. What kind of evidence? She hesitated. The kind that would make the harassment charges look real. My stomach turned. They were going to frame me twice. It gets worse. We have reason to believe they were planning to eliminate you permanently. The room seemed to tilt. Eliminate? Make it look like suicide. Guilt over the harassment charges, career ruined, financial problems. It's a story that would make sense to everyone. I stood up and walked to the window. The street looked different now. Every shadow could hide a threat. What do I do? Testify, help us take them down, and if I don't, they'll kill you anyway. At least this way you have a chance. Rodriguez left me with her card and a direct line to the FBI's Witness Protection Coordinator. She also left me with a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly my life had spiraled out of control. 4 days ago, I was a normal IT worker with a boring job and a routine life. Now I was caught in the middle of a federal investigation with professional killers wanting me dead. The next morning, I called in sick to my temp job and met Rodriguez at a coffee shop downtown. She'd brought backup, a federal agent named Martinez, who looked like he could bench press a car. We need you to wear a wire, Rodriguez said, without preamble. Brennan's lawyer is pushing for a deal. He wants to trade information for a reduced sentence. That's good, right? Only if we can verify what he tells us. We need you to get him talking about the Kolskis. Martinez lit a small device across the table. It looked like a pen, but when he clicked it, a tiny red light appeared. State-of-the-art recording equipment. Battery lasts 8 hours. You want me to visit Brennan in jail? He made bail yesterday. Rodriguez said house arrest, ankle monitor the works, but he can have visitors. He'll never talk to me. He knows I'm the reason he got caught. That's exactly why he'll talk to you. He's angry, scared, probably desperate. People in his position make mistakes. I held the recording device, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to carry so much danger. What if he suspects something? Then you leave immediately, Martinez said. Don't try to be a hero. That afternoon, I stood outside Brennan's house in the suburbs. It was a modest 2-story colonial with a neat lawn and flower beds his wife had probably planted. The American dream built on stolen money. I could see the ankle monitor blinking through his window as I rang the doorbell. Brennan answered wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled T-shirt. His hair was unkempt, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "What the hell are you doing here? I wanted to talk. About what? How you destroyed my life, about the truth." He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside to let me in. His house was a mess. Boxes everywhere like his wife had been packing. Pizza boxes and empty beer bottles covered the coffee table. "Rachel left me," he said, following my gaze. "Took the kids to her mother's. Can't say I blame her. I'm sorry, are you? Or are you here to gloat?" "Neither. I'm here because I want to understand why." He laughed bitterly. "Why what? Why I framed you for harassment, why I stole money, why I ruined both our lives, all of it." He collapsed into his recliner, and for a moment he looked more pathetic than threatening. "It started small," he said. "Just a few thousand here and there. Victor said it was temporary, just until I could pay off my debts. Victor Kowalski." His head snapped up. "How do you know that name?" "The FBI mentioned it." Jesus Christ, they know about Victor. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside my heart was racing. The recording device felt hot in my pocket. "They know about Phoenix Consulting." "Phoenix was just the tip of the iceberg," he said, running his hands through his hair. "Victor's got operations in 12 states, dozens of shell companies." "How did you meet him?" "Online poker. I was down about 50 grand, couldn't make payments. Victor reached out, said he could help. In exchange for what? Access. He needed someone inside a tech company who could approve invoices without asking questions. So you recruited me. I needed someone trustworthy to process the payments, someone who wouldn't get suspicious. But then the audit started. State auditors are thorough. They would have found everything eventually. Victor said I needed to create a distraction, the harassment charges. It was supposed to be simple, get you fired quietly, maybe relocate you somewhere else. Victor's people would have made sure you stayed quiet, made sure how. His face went pale. I thought they just meant money, a payoff to keep your mouth shut. But that's not what they meant. No, after your lawsuit started, Victor called me. He was furious. Said you were a liability that needed to be eliminated. Eliminated how? I don't know, I didn't want to know. That's when I realized how deep I was in. I leaned forward. "Brennan, these people are going to kill me. And probably you too, I know." His voice was barely a whisper. "Help me stop them. I can't. You don't understand what Victor is capable of. Tell me." He was quiet for a long time. Then he got up and went to the window, peering through the blinds. 2 years ago, there was another accountant in Phoenix. Guy named Henderson. He started asking questions about some of the same shell companies. What happened to him? Car accident. Single vehicle. Late at night. Went off a bridge. You think Victor? I know Victor. Henderson's car was found with 40,000 in cash in the trunk. Made it look like he was skimming money, got drunk and crashed. But you don't think that's what happened. Henderson didn't drink, never touched alcohol in his life. The weight of what I was dealing with hit me fully. These weren't just white-collar criminals. They were killers. There's more. Brennan continued. A bookkeeper in Detroit. An office manager in Atlanta. All dead within 6 months of asking the wrong questions. Why are you telling me this? Because Victor's already marked both of us for death. The only question is when. I thought about Rodriguez's offer of witness protection. A new identity, new life, new everything. It was starting to sound less like a burden and more like salvation. What if we could stop them? We can't. Victor's got judges, police, politicians. He's untouchable. The FBI doesn't think so. The FBI doesn't know Victor like I do. But as he said it, something shifted in his expression. Like maybe for the first time he was considering the possibility. What would it take? He asked quietly. Testimony, records, evidence of the whole operation. I'd be dead within a week. Not if Victor's in prison. You'd need evidence of the murders, financial records. Victor's too smart to leave that kind of trail. Where would he keep it? Brennan looked at me like I was insane. You're not seriously thinking about going after Victor directly. I'm thinking about staying alive. Then run, change your name, move to another country. It's your only chance. What about you? I'm already dead. I just haven't stopped breathing yet. I left Brennan's house with more questions than answers, but the recording device in my pocket held valuable information. Victor Kowalski wasn't just a money launderer. He was a killer who'd eliminated anyone who threatened his operation. Rodriguez listened to the recording with a grim expression. This changes everything, she said. We're not just talking about financial crimes anymore. Can you protect me? We can try, but Brennan's right about one thing. Victor's got resources. He's been operating for years without getting caught. So what do? We build a case. Start with the financial crimes. Use those to get warrants for the murder investigations. How long will that take? Months. Maybe years. I might not have months. Rodriguez nodded grimly. That's why we need to move fast. Over the next week, I found myself living in a strange twilight existence. I moved to a safe house the FBI provided, a nondescript apartment in a neighborhood I'd never seen before. I couldn't contact friends or family. Couldn't go to familiar places or maintain my normal routine. Martinez checked on me daily, bringing groceries and updates on the investigation. The FBI had started surveillance on known Kowalski associates, monitoring their communications and financial transactions. We're building a timeline, he explained. Every suspicious death, every shell company, every fake invoice, it's a massive operation. Any progress on finding Victor? He's good at staying hidden. Multiple residences, shell companies for everything, but we'll find him. I spent my days reading, watching TV, and trying not to think about the fact that professional killers were looking for me. It was like being in prison, except the guards were trying to keep people out instead of in. Then, on a Tuesday morning, everything changed. Martinez arrived looking shaken. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Brennan's dead. The words hit me like a physical blow. How? Apparent suicide, hanging in his basement. You don't believe it. His ankle monitor showed he never left the house. No signs of struggle, but the timing is suspicious. Victor has to be. The question is how. We sat in silence for a moment. If Victor could reach Brennan under house arrest with federal monitoring, nowhere was safe. There's something else, Martinez said. Before he died, Brennan called our tip line, left a message. He played the recording on his phone. Brennan's voice was shaky, afraid. This is Brennan Hutchins. If something happens to me, check storage unit 247 at secure space on Maple Street. The key is taped under my kitchen sink. Tell Rodriguez she was right about everything. You check the storage unit. This morning, it's full of records, financial documents, communications, evidence of the whole operation, including the murders. Brennan documented everything. He was more scared of Victor than we realized. The evidence from Brennan's storage unit was devastating. Financial records showing millions of dollars laundered through dozens of companies, email communications between Victor and various employees he'd compromised, and most damning of all, detailed records of the people who'd been eliminated for getting too close to the truth. Henderson in Phoenix, a bookkeeper named Thompson in Detroit, an office manager named Walsh in Atlanta, and 6 others across the country, all killed within months of discovering irregularities in their company's finances. It's enough to bring charges, Rodriguez said. Multiple counts of murder, racketeering, money laundering. If we can find Victor, still no luck with that. He's vanished, but his brother Pavel is still active. We're watching him, hoping he'll lead us to Victor. That night alone in the safe house, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. Brennan's death had shown that Victor could reach anyone, anywhere. I was making coffee the next morning when I heard a key in the lock. Martinez wasn't supposed to arrive until noon. I grabbed the kitchen knife and crept toward the front door. The lock turned and the door opened slowly. Pavel Kowalski stepped inside. He was younger than Victor, maybe 40, with the same cold eyes I'd seen in the photos. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about consequences. "Hello, Thomas," he said calmly. "We need to talk." I held the knife in front of me, but we both knew it wouldn't help. If he wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. "How did you find me?" "Your friend Detective Rodriguez isn't as careful as she thinks." He closed the door behind him and looked around the apartment. Federal safe house. Not bad, better than the motel in Phoenix where we found Henderson. "What do you want? To offer you a choice?" He sat down on the couch like he owned the place. "My brother is upset about recent developments. Your lawsuit, the federal investigation, Brennan's unfortunate death. It's caused problems for our business. Good, is it? Because now 12 families are without income. Dozens of employees will lose their jobs, all because you couldn't leave well enough alone. People died. People die every day. Most of them don't matter. They mattered to me. That's your problem. You think you're some kind of hero." Pavel stood up and walked to the window. "Here's your choice. You disappear. New identity, new life, far away from here. We provide $50,000 to help you start over. In exchange for what? You never testify, never contact the FBI again, never speak about any of this to anyone. And if I refuse, then you join Brennan." I thought about Rodriguez, Martinez, all the FBI agents working to build a case about Henderson and Thompson and Walsh and all the others who died for asking questions. I can't do that. Pavel nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Then you'll die like them. But first we'll make sure everyone you care about understands the consequences of crossing us. I don't have anyone left. Your sister Jennifer in Seattle, your nephew Kyle who just started college, your mother in the nursing home in Tampa, my blood turned to ice. I'd never mentioned my family to anyone connected to this case. You bastard. They're all under surveillance. One phone call from me and they'll have accidents. Car crashes, house fires, medical emergencies. The FBI can't protect them all. What do you want? I want you to call Detective Rodriguez. Tell her you've changed your mind about testifying. Tell her you're dropping out of witness protection. She'll know something's wrong. Then convince her nothing is wrong." He handed me my phone. "Do it now." I stared at the phone, thinking about Jennifer, about Kyle, about my mother. They had no idea their lives were in danger because of me. If I do this, you leave them alone. If you do this and disappear forever, they'll never know how close they came to dying. I dialed Rodriguez's number with shaking hands. "Thomas, what's wrong?" "I'm done," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't do this anymore." "What are you talking about?" "The testimony, the case, all of it. I want out. Thomas, we've been through this. Victor will kill you if you don't testify, maybe, but at least my family will be safe." There was a long pause. "Someone's there, isn't it?" she said quietly. Pavel was watching me intently. I met his eyes and nodded. "I'm fine, I just can't live like this anymore." "Where do you want to meet?" "I don't. I'm leaving town tonight, don't try to find me." "Thomas," I hung up. Pavel smiled. "Very good. Now let's discuss your relocation. What happened next would haunt me for years." Pavel wasn't just offering me a way out. He was offering me a way into a different kind of prison. One where I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, knowing that any mistake could mean death for people I loved. But as we talked about fake identities and new cities, I started to notice things. Pavel was confident, but he was also nervous. He kept checking his phone, glancing at the window. He was expecting someone. "Is Victor coming?" I asked. "My brother doesn't handle the details anymore, but he's nearby." Pavel's expression flickered. Just for a second, but enough to confirm what I suspected. "How nearby?" "That's not your concern, but it was my concern." Because if Victor was close, it meant this whole thing was more than just a relocation offer. It was an execution disguised as a negotiation. Pavel's phone buzzed. He read the message and frowned. "Change of plans," he said. "We're leaving now. Where are we going?" "Somewhere more private." I knew that if I left this apartment, I'd never be seen alive again. Despite his promises about relocation, Pavel was taking me somewhere to die. "I need to pack my things. You won't need them," that's when I was certain. "Actually," I said, "I think I changed my mind about testifying." Pavel's hand moved to his jacket. "Too late for that." "Is it?" I lunged for the kitchen. Not for the knife I dropped, but for the phone Rodriguez had given me for emergencies. It had a panic button that would bring FBI backup immediately. Pavel tackled me before I could reach it, but the struggle knocked over a lamp, sending it crashing to the floor. "You stupid bastard." He snarled, pulling a gun. "You could have lived. So could Henderson and Thompson and Walsh. They were business decisions. This is a personal one." I heard footsteps on the stairs outside, heavy boots moving fast. Pavel heard them too. His eyes went wide. FBI, open up. The door exploded inward. Federal agents poured into the apartment, weapons drawn. Pavel spun toward them, raising his gun, but Martinez put 2 bullets in his chest before he could fire. As Pavel collapsed, Rodriguez helped me to my feet. Are you hurt? How did you know? The phone call. You mentioned your family. You've never talked about family before. You've been monitoring the apartment since yesterday. We knew they'd found you. Martinez was checking Pavel's pulse. He's dead. Rodriguez knelt beside the body and searched his pockets, pulling out his phone. Recent messages, she said, scrolling through them. Looks like Victor's been coordinating from somewhere nearby. How nearby? She held up the phone. According to this, he's in room 237 at the Marriott downtown. 20 minutes later, we were racing through downtown traffic with a full FBI tactical team. I sat in the back of Rodriguez's car, wearing a bulletproof vest, and wondering how my life had become an action movie. This could all be over in an hour, Rodriguez said. Victor's been our white whale for 2 years. What if it's a trap? Then we'll deal with it. The Marriott was a 40-story tower in the heart of the financial district. FBI agents surrounded the building, while others evacuated guests from the floor above and below room 237. I watched from the command vehicle as agents prepared to breach Victor's room. Target acquired, came the voice over the radio. Adult male matches description. Is he armed? Can't tell. He's sitting at a desk, appears to be working on a laptop. Move in. The next few minutes were chaos. Shouting, the sound of a door being smashed. More shouting than silence. Target secured, the voice said finally. Victor Kowalski is in custody. Rodriguez grinned. We got him, but something felt wrong. It had been too easy. Why was he just sitting there? I asked. He had to know we were coming. Maybe he didn't have anywhere else to run, or maybe he wanted to be caught. An hour later at FBI headquarters, I watched through one-way glass as Rodriguez interrogated Victor Kowalski. He was smaller than I'd expected. Mid-50s, gray hair, expensive suit. He looked more like a banker than a killer. We have evidence of at least 9 murders, Rodriguez was saying. Multiple counts of racketeering, money laundering, witness intimidation. Victor said nothing. Your brother is dead. Your network is compromised. It's over. Still nothing. We can offer a deal if you cooperate. Tell us about the other operations, the people you worked with. Victor smiled for the first time. Detective Rodriguez, he said in a slight accent I couldn't place. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. Enlighten me. Phoenix Consulting was one shell company among hundreds. Pavel and I were middle management at best. Rodriguez leaned forward. Who do you work for? People who don't appreciate attention. What people? The kind who can reach federal witnesses in safe houses. The kind who can make FBI detectives disappear. Is that a threat? It's a fact. You think this ends with my arrest? You think Thomas is safe now? Victor looked directly at the one-way glass like he could see me watching. This is just the beginning. 2 days later, Rodriguez got a call that would change everything we thought we knew about the case. They found something in Victor's hotel room, she told me. Financial records showing payments to dozens of government officials, judges, prosecutors, police chiefs, bribes, more than that. It looks like they've been running a systematic corruption operation for years. How high does it go? We don't know yet, but some of these payments were to people involved in our investigation. The implication hit me like a truck. There's a mole in the FBI, or worse, multiple moles. What does that mean for the case? It means we can't trust anyone. Over the next week, the investigation expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. The financial records from Victor's hotel room revealed a network of corruption that reached into every level of law enforcement. 3 federal judges were arrested. A U.S. attorney was indicted. 7 FBI agents were suspended pending investigation, and that was just the beginning. It's like pulling a thread, Rodriguez explained during one of our daily meetings. Every arrest leads to 2 more. Where does it end? We don't know, but we're starting to understand why Victor seemed so confident. He had reason to believe he was untouchable, and now we're finding out just how deep this goes. The media had gotten hold of the story by then. The headlines were sensational. Massive corruption scandal rocks FBI and organized crime infiltrates federal government. My name was kept out of the papers, but I knew it was only a matter of time before someone leaked it. We need to move you again, Martinez said. Too many people know about this safe house. Where to? Somewhere no one will think to look. The new safe house was a farmhouse in rural Virginia, 2 hours from anywhere that mattered. It was isolated, secure, and mind-numbingly boring. I spent my days reading reports about the expanding investigation and trying not to think about how many powerful people wanted me dead. Then, 3 weeks after Victor's arrest, Rodriguez arrived with news that changed everything. Victor's been murdered. What? How? Someone got to him in federal prison, made it look like a suicide, but we know better. Who could reach him there? That's what we're trying to figure out. But it means the people above Victor are cleaning house. Am I next? We don't know, but we're taking precautions. Those precautions included moving me to a different safe house every few days, changing my identity documents, and limiting my contact with anyone connected to the investigation. It was like being erased from existence one piece at a time, but the investigation continued. Every day brought new arrests, new revelations, new evidence of just how extensive the corruption had become. A month after Victor's death, Rodriguez came to see me with an unexpected proposal. "We want you to go public." "What do you mean?" "Testify before Congress. Tell your story on national television." "Are you insane? That would be signing my death warrant." "Maybe. Or maybe it would be the safest thing you could do." "How do you figure that?" "Right now you're a secret. Someone only a few people know about. If you go public, become a household name, it becomes much harder to kill you quietly. I thought about it for a long time. The idea of stepping into the spotlight was terrifying. But so was spending the rest of my life hiding in the shadows. What would I have to do? Tell the truth. Start the finish. How Brennan framed you, how you discovered the corruption. What you learned about the murders. And then what? Then we see what happens. The congressional hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. I spent the previous week preparing with FBI lawyers, going over my testimony, anticipating questions. The night before the hearing, I sat in my hotel room under heavy guard and thought about everything that had led to this moment. A year ago, I was just another office worker, processing invoices and living a quiet life. Now I was about to testify before Congress about a corruption scandal that had already brought down dozens of officials and would likely bring down dozens more. I thought about Brennan, dead in his basement, about Pavel, shot in my safe house apartment, about Victor, murdered in federal prison, about Henderson and Thompson and Walsh and all the others who died for asking questions. Tomorrow, I would tell their stories to the world. The hearing room was packed with reporters, cameras, and spectators. I sat at a long table facing a panel of senators and representatives, my hands shaking despite the beta blockers the FBI doctor had given me. "Mr. Davidson," the committee chairman began. "Please tell us how you first became aware of irregularities at Meridian Technologies." For the next 4 hours, I told my story. Every detail, every revelation, every moment of fear and confusion. I showed them the fake invoices, played recordings of my conversations with Brennan, explained how the corruption network operated. The senators asked tough questions. Some seemed skeptical, others outraged. All of them wanted to know how something like this could happen. "In your opinion, Mr. Davidson," one senator asked, "how extensive is this corruption?" "Based on what I've seen," I replied, "I believe it reaches into every major law enforcement agency. FBI, DEA, U.S. attorneys' offices, federal courts. It's not just a few bad actors. It's a systematic compromise of our justice system. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem." When the hearing ended, I was exhausted but relieved. I told the truth, all of it, in front of the entire country. That night, the story dominated every news channel. My face was on the front page of every newspaper. The corruption scandal had a human face now, and it was mine. Rodriguez met me at the hotel that evening. "How do you feel?" "Exposed." "That's good. Exposure is protection now. What happens next?" Now we see how many more dominoes fall. Over the following weeks, my testimony triggered an avalanche of new investigations. Congressional committees launched inquiries into multiple agencies. The Justice Department appointed special prosecutors. Internal affairs divisions opened hundreds of cases. The corruption network that had seemed so powerful began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. But the people behind it weren't going down without a fight. 3 days after my testimony, someone tried to poison me at a restaurant. The FBI food tester caught it before I took a bite. A week later, A car tried to run me down as I left the courthouse after another hearing. My security detail pushed me out of the way just in time. 2 weeks after that, someone sent a package bomb to my hotel. The bomb squad disposed of it safely, but the message was clear. Going public hadn't made me safe. They're getting desperate, Rodriguez said. That's good news. How is attempted murder good news? Because desperate people make mistakes. She was right. Each assassination attempt left clues, DNA evidence, fingerprints, surveillance footage. The FBI was building cases against the people trying to kill me, which led them to the people giving the orders. 6 months after my congressional testimony, the scope of what we'd uncovered was staggering. 127 government officials arrested or indicted. 45 companies shut down for money laundering $340 million in assets. Seized 23 murders solved and attributed to the corruption network, but the biggest victory came when they arrested the man behind it all. Senator Richard Blackwood had been running the corruption network for over a decade. As chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he'd had access to information about every major federal investigation. He'd used that access to protect criminals, eliminate threats, and build a shadow network that reached into every corner of the justice system. When they arrested him, they found evidence linking him to dozens of murders, including Victor's death in prison. I testified against Blackwood at his trial, facing him across a courtroom as I described how his network had operated. He stared at me with cold hatred throughout my testimony, but he never said a word. The jury convicted him on all charges, life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led him away in shackles, he looked back at me one last time. This isn't over. He mowed silently, but it was over. The corruption network was dismantled. The murders were solved. The criminals were in prison. I was finally free. That was 5 years ago. Today, I live under my real name in a small city in Colorado. I work as a cybersecurity consultant, helping companies detect financial fraud. It's not exciting work, but it's honest work. And after everything I've been through, honest work feels like a luxury. I still get death threats occasionally. Men like Blackwood have followers, people who believe I'm a traitor for exposing the truth. But the FBI monitors the threats, and so far, none have turned into actual danger. Rodriguez retired from the FBI and now teaches criminal justice at a university. Martinez runs the financial crimes unit in the Denver field office. We stay in touch, sharing updates about our lives and families. Last month, Rodriguez sent me a newspaper clipping, a headline that read Financial Fraud Network Exposed by Employee Whistleblower. The story was about a woman in Phoenix who discovered her company was being used to launder money for drug cartels. Instead of staying quiet, she'd gone to the FBI. Instead of being intimidated by threats, she'd testified before a grand jury. The corruption network was shut down. The criminals were arrested. Another ordinary person had found the courage to do the right thing. I kept the newspaper clipping on my desk as a reminder. A reminder that the system only works when people are willing to fight for it. That justice isn't something that happens automatically. It's something we have to choose again and again, even when the cost is high. My boss tried to fire me for something I didn't do. Instead, I exposed something he actually did. And in doing so, I helped expose something much bigger, a corruption network that had been poisoning our justice system for years. It cost me my old life, my sense of security, my anonymity. But it gave me something more valuable, the knowledge that sometimes one person really can make a difference, even when that person is just a mid-level IT worker who got curious about some fake invoices.